The first thing Ruth Danner noticed was the white chair. It sat behind Samuel's old desk, bright as a clean tooth, in an office where everything else was oak, dust, and machinery grease. A canvas tote hung from one arm. Beside the computer stood 3 matching organizers and a silver frame holding a photograph of Luke and Celeste on a beach. Celeste looked up from the desk. "Oh, you're early." Ruth stopped in the doorway with 2 coffees in her hands. She was always early. At 63, after 32 years of opening Danner Woodworks, she still arrived before 7 every Monday because the installers started calling at 7:10 and the suppliers began lying at 7:15. "Your chair came," Ruth said. Celeste touched the white armrest as if surprised to find it beneath her. "Luke ordered it. The old one was Murder on My Back." Ruth's handwritten production calendar was gone from the wall. In its place hung a dry erase board divided into colored columns. Ruth stared at it long enough to find 3 errors before Luke appeared behind her and said, too brightly, "Good, you're both here." That was how Ruth learned her family had replaced her. Not with an argument or even a warning, with office supplies. One of the coffee lids gave a soft pop under her thumb. Luke looked so much like Samuel around the eyes that moments of anger could still catch Ruth unprepared. He had his father's broad forehead, his habit of leaning forward when he wanted agreement, and the same belief that a cheerful tone made unpleasant facts reasonable. "Let's go upstairs," he said. "My coat's still on. That's fine. I bought your coffee." He glanced at the cup in her right hand. "Is that mine?" "No, Luke. I bought 2 for myself." For half a second he almost smiled. Then he remembered the morning required seriousness. Celeste rose from the white chair. She wore navy slacks and a cream sweater, with sleeves that stayed out of everything. Ruth had never owned a garment so obedient. "I can give you 2 some privacy," Celeste said. Luke shook his head. "You should be part of this." "Of course she should," Ruth said. "She has the chair." The joke landed badly. Celeste picked up a yellow legal pad, then put it down again. Luke turned toward the stairs, leading to the apartment above the shop. Ruth followed because refusing would look dramatic, and she had spent most of her life avoiding scenes in rooms where men were waiting for one. The shop was waking below them. A saw whined, stopped, then whined again. Someone dropped a clamp. Eddie Mercer called, "That better not have been my good bit," and somebody else denied everything. Upstairs, the apartment still smelled faintly of Samuel's aftershave, though he had been dead 18 months and the bottle was long gone. Ruth had stopped trying to explain that. Some smells entered the walls, some entered you. Luke pulled out a kitchen chair for her. She remained standing. "Tell me what's happened." "Nothing happened." "Then I'll go back downstairs." "Mom." He said it with warning, not affection. Celeste sat at the table and folded her hands. A new black binder rested in front of her. Ruth recognized the label on its spine, Office Transition. She set both coffees beside the sink. Luke began with the history of the business, which was bold, considering Ruth had been present for all of it. "Dad started this place with 1 table saw. He started it with my tax refund. I know that. And a table saw that belonged to my uncle. I know, Mom." Then skip the documentary. Celeste looked down. The corner of her mouth moved, but Ruth could not tell whether she was hiding a smile or a grimace. Luke exhaled through his nose. "Danner Woodworks has grown. We're not running jobs out of a garage anymore. We have 13 employees, multiple crews, and more volume than Dad ever handled. We had 14 employees Friday. Raymond was temporary. Raymond was here 6 years. This is exactly why we need to talk." Ruth finally sat, though not in the chair Luke had pulled out. She chose Samuel's old chair by the window. Its wicker seat creaked beneath her. Luke placed one hand on the binder. "Celeste is taking over the administrative side." The saw downstairs started again. It cut steadily through something thick. "What part of the administrative side?" "All of it." Ruth looked at Celeste. Celeste met her gaze this time. There was color high in her cheeks, but her voice was even. Accounts receivable, payroll coordination, purchasing records, scheduling. Scheduling production or installations? Both, eventually. "You put the Haverford kitchen before the Haney built-ins." Celeste blinked. "What?" "On your board, blue column. The Haverford counters won't be templated until Thursday, and Frank Haney has taken off work Wednesday to let the installers in." Luke pressed his lips together. "This isn't about the board. It will be on Wednesday." He opened the binder. Inside were tab sections, printed spreadsheets, and a page titled Ruth's Responsibilities. Her entire working life had been reduced to 11 bullet points. Vendor communication, customer follow-up, general office assistance, general office assistance. Ruth touched that phrase with one finger. Luke continued. The current system depends too much on one person remembering everything, that person being me. Yes, and that's not sustainable. It sustained your father. Dad's not here. The words struck the room and stayed there. Luke's face changed immediately. I didn't mean, I know what you meant. Celeste reached for the binder, but Luke kept his hand on it. We all agree you've done more than enough, he said. You took care of Dad. You held things together. Nobody is denying that. The way he said, nobody made Ruth wonder who had been discussing her. Who's we? Luke glanced at Celeste. Who is we, Luke? Jenna agrees. Ruth sat back. Jenna knows. She wants what's best for you. Does she? She thinks you need a life outside this place. I have a life. You work 10 hours a day and live above the shop. I'm downstairs 8 hours. The other 2 are spent up here avoiding you. Can we not do this? Ruth looked through the window at the gravel lot. Samuel's truck was parked near the loading bay, though it belonged to Luke now. The driver's door still had the shallow dent from the afternoon. Samuel backed into the mailbox and blamed sunlight for being in the wrong place. When does this start? She asked. Luke's shoulders lowered. He mistook her calm for surrender. Technically, today. And what am I doing today? Nothing? That's the good part. Celeste closed her eyes briefly. Ruth looked from one of them to the other. You might want to work on how you sell that. Luke pushed back from the table. We're having a lunch for you at noon. A lunch. Just the team. Jenna's coming. We got a cake. The absurdity of the cake nearly saved her. She imagined pale frosting, blue-piped flowers, perhaps good luck. Ruth written across the top as if she had chosen to go somewhere. You fired me and bought dessert. It isn't firing. You're retiring. Retirement usually involves the retiree knowing about it. You would never choose it on your own. So you chose it for me. You're twisting this. Ruth studied her son's face. Beneath his impatience was something else. Fear, perhaps, or shame trying to pass itself off as authority. She had seen that expression when he was 27 and confessed that he had underpriced the Fairview hotel job by $9,000. Samuel had shouted for an hour. Ruth had spent 3 nights calling suppliers and reworking the schedule until the loss became survivable. Luke had thanked his father for giving him another chance. What happens to my paycheck? She asked. Luke moved a salt shaker half an inch. It stops with the position. Today, there'll be your normal deposit Friday. That covers last week. Yes. And the apartment? Neither answered quickly enough. Ruth looked toward the narrow hall. Her cardigan hung from the bathroom door. Samuel's old boots remained beneath the coat hooks because she had not yet figured out what kind of widow threw away good boots. Celeste spoke softly. Luke said the apartment was part of the compensation arrangement. Luke shot her a look. It is, he said. We need it available. Potentially for a night foreman or storage. We haven't decided. You've decided I'm not in it. No one's throwing you out. How long? A month. The saw stopped downstairs. In the silence, Ruth heard the refrigerator motor click on. Luke began talking about options. Jenna had found a pleasant apartment complex 17 minutes from her house. There was a community room, organized trips, and raised garden beds. Ruth could have lunch with people. She could help Aunt Marilyn get to appointments. Jenna would worry less. They all would. Ruth watched his mouth move and understood with increasing clarity that her children had not imagined her doing nothing. They had imagined her doing different work for free. Does Aunt Marilyn know she needs my help? She asked. Luke paused. She's 81. She also drives like she's qualifying at Talladega. That's not the point. It may be the point for pedestrians. He rubbed both hands over his face. Why are you making every part of this difficult? Ruth stood. Because you made every part of it without me. She went downstairs before either of them could stop her. The office looked smaller, with Celeste's things in it. Ruth took her cardigan from the hook and opened the bottom desk drawer. Her peppermint tin was gone. So were the stamps, the spare reading glasses, and the bottle of hand lotion Jenna had given her 2 Christmases ago. Everything had been packed into a copy paper box beneath the side table. Her name was written on the box in black marker. Eddie appeared in the doorway holding a tape measure. He was 58, bald except for a determined gray fringe, and incapable of entering any room without looking as though he had been sent to collect a debt. "You going somewhere?" he asked. "Apparently." He looked at the white chair, then at the box. Oh, that one syllable carried more understanding than Luke's entire binder. "Did you know?" Ruth asked. Eddie's thumb worried the metal edge of his tape measure. "Luke said there might be changes." "When?" "Thursday. And you didn't call me?" "He told us not to. Said they wanted to surprise you." Ruth laughed once. She could not help it. Eddie looked miserable. "That came out wrong?" "No, it came out exactly right." People found reasons to pass the office after that. Frank asked where the quarter-inch shims were, though they had occupied the same shelf since 2009. Tasha brought Ruth an invoice that required no action. Somebody in the finishing room turned the radio down. At noon, Jenna arrived carrying a bouquet from the grocery store and wearing the careful expression she used around sick people. The cake said, "Happy Retirement, Ruth," in blue icing. One corner had been dented by the lid. Luke gave a speech about devotion, sacrifice, and a well-earned rest. Ruth stood beside him, while 13 adults avoided her eyes. Celeste stayed near the back with her arms folded. Eddie stared openly at the floor. When Luke finished, everyone clapped. Ruth cut the cake because no one else seemed able to move. She gave Luke the piece with the exclamation point. Jenna followed her upstairs afterward. "Mom, please don't be like this." Ruth opened a kitchen drawer and began sorting batteries into a grocery bag. "Like what?" "Cold. I'm packing AA batteries. There's only so much warmth the task requires. We're trying to help you. You found me an apartment. It's nice. You've been inside? I saw the website." Ruth nodded. "Practically family then." Jenna leaned against the counter. She was 36 and had Samuel's dark hair, Ruth's narrow hands, and a talent for making worry sound like accusation. "You can't stay up here forever. I have 30 days, apparently. There are other options." "Yes." Something in Ruth's voice made Jenna straighten. Ruth crossed the living room to the old secretary desk. In its top drawer, beneath insurance statements and a stack of sympathy cards she could not throw away, lay a single brass key on a wooden tag. "Maze," Samuel had printed on it years ago. Jenna saw the key and groaned. "Mom, no." Ruth closed her fingers around it. "That place is falling down," Jenna said. "Luke said there were animals in the chimney. There are animals in his chimney, too. He calls them squirrels and buys them special corn. The cottage isn't a home, not yet. You don't have the money to fix it." That, at least, was true. Ruth's checking account held $912.46. Her survivor's payment would cover food and taxes. Barely, but not a roof, plumbing, heat, and every other neglected thing waiting in Bellwether. Jenna stepped closer. "Dad used to laugh about that place." Ruth slipped the key into her coat pocket. "Your father laughed about lots of things he didn't understand," she said. She carried her box down the back stairs, past the retirement balloons tied to the railing. No one tried to stop her. In the gravel lot, she set the box on the passenger seat and placed the dented cake beside it. Then Ruth drove toward Bellwether to see what $900, a brass key, and one thoroughly unwanted woman could keep alive. The road narrowed 10 miles outside town, trading painted lines for patched asphalt and then patched asphalt for gravel. Ruth drove with both hands on the wheel, while the box in the passenger seat shifted at every turn. The cake slid against the door twice. Blue icing smeared itself across the plastic lid until Happy Retirement became Happy Tire. "That's more honest," she said. The cottage stood at the end of May's rutted lane, smaller than Ruth remembered, and considerably less upright. Brown leaves filled the porch corners. One shutter hung by a single hinge. A cedar branch rested on the roof, as casually as an arm along the back of a sofa. Ruth shut off the car and listened. No saws, no reversing trucks, no office phone ringing, while someone shouted that they could not find the tape dispenser sitting directly in front of them. Wind moved through the bare trees. Farther off, hidden by the slope, the Bellwether River made a low, steady sound. The brass key resisted the lock. Ruth leaned her shoulder into the swollen door, turned the key harder, and heard something crack on the other side. "May, if you booby-trapped this place, I hope you left instructions." The door opened 6 inches before striking a collapsed umbrella stand. Ruth squeezed through sideways and lifted it out of the way. Cold, damp air met her. The front room smelled of old ashes, mouse droppings, and the specific green odor of a house that had been losing an argument with the woods. The furniture was still there. May's horsehair sofa crouched beneath a sheet. Two ladder-back chairs stood by the fireplace, one holding a basket of petrified pine cones. A braided rug had curled up at both ends. The long pine table stretched beneath the front windows, scarred by decades of hot pans, elbows, card games, and May cutting things without a board. Ruth set the key on the table and immediately picked it up again. One did not leave the only key in a house whose door had to be fought open. She checked the ceiling first. A brown stain spread over the far corner, but the plaster felt dry. The roof above the kitchen was worse. Water had tracked down the wall behind the sink, blistering the paint. The cabinet doors had swollen shut. Ruth pulled one until the handle came off in her hand. "All right," she said. "You can be that way." The tap coughed twice and produced nothing. She went outside to the pump box, stepping carefully around a soft place in the porch. May's old well system was housed under an upside-down galvanized tub weighted with a brick. Ruth lifted it and found the pressure switch contacts filmed with rust. Samuel would have tapped the housing with a screwdriver and called that diagnosis. If the pump started, he would claim victory. If it did not, he would say the whole thing needed replacing. Ruth had spent enough years following behind him to know that machines sometimes responded to being cleaned, tightened, and asked again. She found May's tools in the kitchen, exactly where they had always been. A coffee can full of mismatched screwdrivers, pliers with tape around one handle, a hammer whose head had been loose since the Clinton administration. Ruth cleaned the contacts with an emery board from her purse and reset the switch. The pump hummed. A pipe beneath the cottage began knocking like an angry visitor. Ruth hurried inside. Rust-colored water spat from the kitchen faucet, then settled into a thin stream. Under the sink, a joint leaked steadily onto the floor. She shut the water off again. "One success at a time," she told the cottage. The electricity was less cooperative. 2 outlets worked, one sparked, and the bathroom light came on only when the kitchen switch was down. Ruth found the breaker panel in the bedroom closet. Its handwritten labels included lights, plugs, pump, and don't. She left don't alone. The chimney damper opened after she jabbed it with a broom handle, showering the hearth with soot, and what appeared to be half a bird's nest. No carcass came down. Ruth considered that encouraging. She walked through each room with the back of an envelope and the pen from her coat pocket, making a list. Roof patch, chimney, pump switch, sink joint, wiring, porch, window glass, heat, mattress, mice. After mice, she added everything else. The cottage had no furnace. May had heated it with a black iron wood stove in the kitchen, but the stove was gone. Luke had taken it after the funeral, claiming he could use it in his workshop. Ruth remembered that it had sat behind his garage ever since, covered with a blue tarp and a deflated plastic reindeer. She took out her phone. Luke answered on the second ring. "Mom, where are you?" "At May's." There was a pause. "You drove all the way out there?" "It was easier than carrying the cottage to town." "Jenna said you took the key. She's upset." "Jenna is often upset when other people make decisions." "She found you an actual apartment." Ruth looked at the ceiling stain. "How generous. This isn't funny." "No, it wasn't especially funny this morning either." Luke lowered his voice, which meant someone was nearby. "Come back. We can sit down after everybody leaves." "You bought a binder, Luke." "I believe sitting down has done all it can." "Fine, take tonight. But we need to talk about the Haverford file. Celeste can't find the stone supplier's confirmation. It's clipped inside the back cover." Silence. Ruth closed her eyes. The answer had come automatically. "Okay," Luke said. "Good. And Frank Haney called about Wednesday. He took the day off." "Right, I know. You didn't until Celeste told you." "Mom, please." She could picture him at the white chair, searching for a pen that was no longer where his hand expected it to be. "What happened to May's stove?" she asked. "The wood stove?" "Yes. I have it, but it's no good. Firebox is cracked. You told me you were going to restore it." I might still. It's been 4 years. I've been busy, so have I. If you want it, take it. I'm not stopping you." "I don't have 3 men and a loading trailer," Luke sighed. "Then, what exactly do you expect me to do?" The question was so familiar that Ruth almost answered it. She nearly asked him to bring the stove, inspect the roof, help with the pump, or simply stand in the doorway and look at what his mother had chosen. Instead, she said, "Nothing. Celeste knows about the Haverford confirmation now. You should be fine." She ended the call before he could hand her another problem. The cottage seemed colder afterward. Ruth carried the box and cake inside. She found an unopened package of paper plates in May's pantry, brushed a dead beetle off the top one, and cut herself a square of retirement cake with a paring knife. The frosting had shifted to one side. She ate standing at the sink. It tasted like sweetened shortening and spite. The last time she had sat at May's table, Samuel had still been strong enough to drive. May had served beans with ham and complained that Luke wanted her to sell. "He says nobody needs 3 acres," May had said. "Nobody needs 7 clamps either," Ruth replied. "But Luke bought those." Samuel had laughed. "Land's not the same as tools." "No," May said. "Land holds its value." Samuel had looked around at the sagging shelves and crooked windows. "This place doesn't hold anything." Ruth could still hear the way he said it, not cruelly, which had somehow made it worse. Samuel believed a thing's worth was obvious and measurable. A cabinet door hung square, or it did not. A job made money, or it did not. A cottage that required more than it could return was sentiment, and sentiment was a luxury tolerated in women. She threw the paper plate into a grocery bag and went back outside. Bellwether Hardware occupied a long brick building beside a laundromat and a taxidermy studio. The sign had once been red. It had faded to the color of old tomato soup. A brass bell rang when Ruth opened the door. The store smelled of lumber, fertilizer, rubber boots, and coffee that had been cooking too long. Narrow aisles climbed toward a tin ceiling. Handwritten signs pointed to plumbing, paint, electrical, and things. People keep asking for. Behind the counter stood a broad-shouldered woman with short silver hair and red glasses hanging from a beaded cord. She was arguing with a man in stained coveralls. "I'm not returning a used toilet seat," she told him. "It didn't fit. That does not make it unused." The man noticed Ruth and lowered his voice. "I wiped it. Wonderful. Put that on your Christmas cards." He carried the seat out under one arm. The woman watched him go, then turned to Ruth. "Please tell me you need nails. I need most of a house." That's less pleasant, but still better than what he wanted. Ruth introduced herself. The woman's expression sharpened. "You're May Fletcher's niece. You knew May?" Everybody knew May. Liking her was more selective. She held out her hand. "D. Walsh." Her grip was warm and firm. Ruth showed Dee the list. Dee read it once, then looked over the top of her red glasses. "Are you planning to fix all this today? I'd settle for not freezing to death tonight. That's a sensible first phase." Dee began moving through the store with Ruth behind her. She rejected Ruth's choice of pipe fitting, replaced an expensive pump switch with a cheaper model, and refused to sell her chimney brushes. "You don't know what's blocking the flue. I saw a nest." "You saw part of a nest. Could be 6 feet of nest and a deeply offended owl. What do you recommend?" "Howard Price. He does chimney work when his hands allow it. Charges fair. I can't pay much." "Then say that before he comes, not after." Dee put roofing membrane, plastic sheeting, insulation, screws, work gloves, caulk, and 2 sheets of plywood on an order cart. She located a used wood stove in a back storage area, smaller than May's but sound, with surface rust and an intact firebox. "How much?" Ruth asked. 200, 150, 180. "Does it come with pipe?" "It comes with me," not laughing at 150. They settled at 170 with a length of used stovepipe included. At the register, the total came to $907.83. Ruth looked at the glowing numbers. Her account held $912.46. She still needed gasoline. Food could wait until Friday, but the car could not run on determination. "Take off the new gloves," she said. Dee did. "Take off 1 roll of insulation. That room won't hold heat. It'll hold more heat than my car." Dee removed the roll and rang the order again. $898.61. Ruth inserted her bank card. For a moment, neither woman spoke. The machine processed the payment with maddening leisure, as if consulting someone wiser. "Approved" appeared on the screen. $14 remained in Ruth's account. Dee tore off the receipt. "Delivery tomorrow morning. I've got a folding cot you can borrow. I didn't ask for one. No, you also didn't buy a mattress. I can sleep on the sofa. May once kept a jar of bacon grease under that sofa. I wouldn't." Ruth started to object. Dee raised one hand. Borrowing is not charity. Charity doesn't come back with the hinges oiled. By the time Ruth returned to the cottage, daylight was draining out of the woods. Dee had wedged the folded cot into the back seat beside the retirement cake. Ruth carried it inside, spread 2 old quilts over the canvas, and placed a saucepan beneath the kitchen leak. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from Jenna, 1 from Luke, and a text from an unfamiliar number. "This is Celeste. I found the confirmation. I'm sorry about today." Ruth read it twice. Before she could decide whether to answer, the kitchen light flickered. Somewhere inside the wall came a sharp pop. The cottage went dark. Ruth stood in the middle of the room, holding her phone, its small screen lighting the swollen cabinets and the saucepan on the floor. Then something heavy moved across the roof. Ruth listened. The weight crossed the roof again, in 3 deliberate steps, paused above the kitchen, then scratched. "Of course," she whispered. "Why wouldn't you have claws?" She turned on the flashlight on her phone and aimed it at the ceiling. Nothing came through. The cottage settled around her with small pops and sighs. Rain ticked against the front windows. The scratching moved toward the chimney. Ruth pictured an animal dropping into the cold fireplace and choosing her face as the nearest exit. She dragged May's brass fire screen across the hearth, wedged one of the ladder-back chairs against it, and stepped away. The animal, or branch, or ghost with poor manners went quiet. She found the breaker panel by phone light. Every switch appeared to be on, except don't. Ruth shut off the kitchen circuit and tried the main breaker. The bathroom light returned, weak and yellow. So did one outlet in the front room. "That's all we need," she said. The refrigerator was empty. The pump was off. The cottage did not agree, but it refrained from another explosion. Ruth plugged in her phone, then opened Celeste's message. "I found the confirmation. I'm sorry about today." There were several things Celeste might mean. Sorry about taking the desk. Sorry about the apartment. Sorry Ruth had found out before the cake. Sorry the office chair was so white it looked smug. Ruth typed, "Thank you for telling me." She erased it. Then she typed, "Good. Frank Haney needs a call before 8 tomorrow." She erased that too. In the end, she sent, "I'm glad you found it," Celeste replied almost immediately. "The back cover. Like you said." Ruth set the phone face down. She changed into work pants she had packed that morning, without knowing why, kept her sweater on, and climbed beneath May's quilts. The cot bowed in the middle. One metal leg squeaked every time she breathed. The saucepan caught the kitchen drip with slow, resonant plinks. At 10:30, Luke left a voicemail. "Mom, call me. This is getting out of hand." At 11, Jenna left another. "At least tell me you're safe. I don't know why you're doing this to us." Ruth held the phone above her face in the dark. She wanted to call Jenna and ask what exactly was being done to her, worrying her, embarrassing her, refusing a pleasant apartment discovered through an internet advertisement. Instead, she sent both of them the same message: "I'm safe. Going to sleep." Jenna responded with a heart. Luke did not respond at all. The roof scratched again shortly after midnight. Ruth banged the ceiling with May's broom until whatever was up there scurried away. 10 minutes later, she realized she was holding a broom in a freezing cottage, threatening wildlife while still wearing the pearl earrings she had put on for work. She removed the earrings, tucked them into the peppermint tin she had found in her box, and laughed until the laugh tipped unexpectedly into tears. She cried quietly, out of habit. In 32 years of marriage, Samuel had never once told her not to cry. He simply became so uncomfortable when she did that she usually ended up reassuring him. Luke had inherited that too. When the tears passed, nothing had improved. The cot still sagged. Rain still found the saucepan. But no one was waiting for Ruth to make her sadness convenient. She slept. A truck horn woke her after 7. Gray morning filled the room. Ruth sat up too quickly and the cot folded 6 inches in the middle before catching itself. Her neck hurt. Her left foot had gone numb. She put on Samuel's old work jacket and went outside. A faded red delivery truck was backing down the lane. Dee leaned out the driver's window, steering with one hand. A dark green pickup followed her. Dee climbed out wearing a brown canvas coat and carrying 2 foam cups. "You look terrible," she said. "I slept in your cot." It was designed for guilt, not comfort. She handed Ruth a coffee. It was strong enough to remove paint. The man getting out of the green pickup was tall but stooped slightly at the shoulders, as though door frames had spent years teaching him caution. He had a narrow gray beard and large hands with swollen knuckles. A canvas tool bag hung from his right hand. "This is Howard Price," Dee said. "No relation, despite rumors." Howard looked at Dee. "Nobody has ever rumored we're related." "I started one this morning," he nodded to Ruth. "Ma'am, Ruth. Dee says you've got a chimney full of wildlife and electricity that objects to being used. Dee has known me less than a day and is already discussing my problems. She does that." "It builds community," Dee said. The three of them unloaded Ruth's purchases. Howard carried the plywood one sheet at a time, bracing it against his shoulder. Ruth reached for the second sheet. "I've got it," he said. "So do I." He released his side. The plywood's full weight dropped into Ruth's hands. She staggered one step before catching it against her hip. Howard watched without expression. "You could have warned me," she said. "You seemed certain." Dee coughed into her coffee. Together, Ruth and Howard moved the sheet beneath the porch roof. He did not offer to take it again, but she appreciated more than she intended to. The used wood stove came last. It sat on a wheeled platform in the truck, ugly and square, with rust freckling the door. Howard inspected the firebox with a flashlight. "Not bad." "That sounded almost cheerful," Dee said. "I'm saving the rest for Easter." They used a ramp and hand truck to move the stove into the kitchen. Ruth cleared the space where May's stove had stood. The old hearth pad remained, patterned with faded brown tiles. Two were cracked, but Howard pressed his boot against them and said they were stable. He examined the chimney from inside, then walked around the cottage. Ruth followed him. The thing on the roof turned out to be a raccoon. It sat beside the cedar branch, fat and offended, watching them from above the gutter. Howard tipped his head back. "That yours?" "I haven't named it. Don't." Makes the eviction harder. The cedar branch had scraped away several shingles, but had not broken through. The kitchen leak came from a lower seam, where an old patch had lifted. Howard pointed without climbing. "You can cover it with membrane for now. Roof needs more than that before next winter. I'm working on today. Today's cheaper." At the breaker panel, he removed the cover and shone his flashlight inside. His hands moved slowly. Twice he stopped to flex his fingers. Ruth stood in the bedroom doorway. "What happened to them?" she asked. "Time." "That specific?" "Arthritis with a long introduction." He traced a wire and frowned. "Kitchen circuit's been warm. See the color here?" Ruth leaned closer. The insulation around one wire had browned. "Is it safe?" "No." "How unsafe?" Howard looked at her over his shoulder. "You planning to rank the ways your house can kill you?" "I'm budgeting." The left corner of his mouth moved. He disconnected the kitchen circuit completely and checked the remaining lines. The outlet in the front room could handle a lamp and phone charger, he said, but not a space heater. The pump circuit appeared sound once the switch was replaced. The stove could be installed after the chimney was cleared and the flue inspected. Ruth took out her envelope list and added wiring in larger letters. "What will it cost? For today?" "Nothing." Dee said assessment. "I didn't ask Dee to arrange an assessment, then pay her nothing. I'm asking what the repairs will cost." Howard named a figure that made Ruth look at the panel as if it had insulted her personally. "That includes materials?" "Most." "I have materials. You have screws, insulation, roofing membrane, and enough caulk to seal a modest submarine. You don't have electrical wire. I have $14. Howard replaced the panel cover. He did not tell her everything would work out. He did not offer to do it free. "All right," he said. The lack of pity irritated her less than kindness would have. Dee appeared in the doorway. "Howard needs help with his books." Howard closed his tool bag. "I didn't say that. You've said it every day for 6 months. I said I hate my books. Same thing, at your age." Ruth folded her arms. "What kind of help?" "No kind," Howard said. Dee ignored him. He closed his regular repair business in January. There are receipts in 3 rooms and a truck. His accountant used the phrase "act of God" and went home. He was being dramatic. He found a gasoline receipt from 1998. That was in an old jacket. Ruth looked at Howard. "You kept the jacket that long?" "It was a good jacket." She understood that. "How many years need sorting?" "Last 2, Dee said. "1, Howard said. 3 if we're being honest." Nobody invited honesty. Ruth drank the last of her coffee. "I can sort receipts." "I can pay you," Howard said. but not what an accountant charges. I'm not an accountant. Good, mine's scared of me. Dee leaned against the doorframe. You two can argue over money after neither of you freezes to death. Ruth bristled. I'm not freezing to death. You slept in your coat. It's a good coat. Howard glanced at her, and the corner of his mouth moved again. Dee went back outside to bring in the remaining supplies. Ruth followed, partly to escape being observed. The delivery receipt listed every item, but the quantities were written in no recognizable order. Beneath Ruth's signature were 3 unrelated calculations, a coffee stain, and a note reminding Dee to call someone named Lorna about hinges. You run the store like this? Ruth asked. Dee took the clipboard, successfully. That isn't what I asked. Inventory software and I have religious differences. What differences? It believes everything must exist in one location. Ruth looked through the open back of the truck. A box marked brass fittings contained paint rollers. 2 rolls of insulation were tucked behind lawn fertilizer. A handwritten delivery schedule had been taped to the wall and revised so often that Tuesday appeared to follow Thursday. Who does your paperwork? You're looking at her. That explains the toilet seat. Dee laughed, a low sound that seemed too large for the cold morning. I need help 3 mornings a week, she said. Maybe 4 when spring orders start. Register, invoices, receiving, keeping me from ordering 600 drawer pulls because I misplaced the first 600. Ruth stared at her. I'm not offering charity, Dee added. Charity doesn't get a store key. I already have a job. The words came out before Ruth could stop them. Silence settled briefly between them. Dee's face changed, not with pity, but recognition. All right. I had one. All right. I'm not looking to start over behind a cash register. Then don't. Dee tucked the clipboard beneath her arm and walked toward the truck. Ruth watched her go. The refusal should have felt strong. Instead, it sounded like Luke insisting he might still restore May's wood stove. Howard came down the porch steps carrying his tool bag. I can come back tomorrow to clear the chimney, he said. If you want, what would you charge? 4 hours sorting receipts. 3. 4, and I'll install the stove. Does that include the stovepipe? The pipe is sitting in your kitchen. That wasn't my question. Howard looked toward Dee's truck. May argued like that. You knew her? She hired me twice and fired me 3 times. That arithmetic doesn't work. It did for May. Ruth held out her hand. 4 hours. His handshake was careful because of his knuckles, but not weak. After the trucks left, the cottage felt quiet in a different way. Materials stood stacked beneath the porch. The stove waited in the kitchen. Nothing was fixed exactly, but the problems had begun acquiring names. Ruth climbed 6 rungs of May's aluminum ladder, with the roofing membrane tucked under one arm. The ladder shifted. She froze. Below her, the ground seemed considerably farther away than it had from the porch. Her right knee trembled against the rung. She could see the lifted roof seam, close enough to touch if she climbed 2 more steps. For years, she had gone up ladders without thinking. She had carried plywood with Samuel, moved filing cabinets with Luke, and worked full days after spending nights beside a hospital bed. Her body had always complained later, privately. Now it objected in advance. Ruth climbed down, furious with every careful step. On the ground, she stared at the ladder until her phone rang. Frank Haney's name appeared on the screen. She answered from habit. Ruth, he said, relieved. Thank God. Your office says my installation isn't on the schedule. Ruth looked at the cottage roof, the unused membrane, and the ladder she could no longer bully herself into climbing. Frank, she said, I don't have an office anymore. Frank was quiet long enough for Ruth to hear a television in the background. What do you mean, you don't have an office? I no longer work at Danner Woodworks. Since when? Yesterday. Nobody said anything. They had cake. Another silence. Frank cleared his throat. Was this your decision? Ruth looked at the roofing membrane lying in the grass. Rain had begun spotting its black surface. No, she said, but the shop is still doing your installation. You need to speak with Luke or Celeste. I spoke with a woman named Celeste. She said Thursday. You took Wednesday off. Exactly. Ruth shut her eyes. There was no reason for her to be surprised. The whiteboard had told her this would happen before 7 o'clock Monday morning. Call Celeste back, she said. Tell her your date was confirmed on February 6th. There's a yellow copy of the work order in the installation binder behind the materials list. Can't you call her? No. You know, I hired Danner because of you. You hired Danner because Samuel's cabinet survived your brother-in-law sitting on a drawer. That was a strong drawer. It was not designed as a chair, Frank. He gave a small, unwilling laugh. I don't like this. Neither do I. Ruth made him promise not to cancel before speaking with Celeste. After they hung up, she stood with the phone in her hand, feeling as though she had stepped halfway back through a door she meant to close. The phone rang again before she reached the ladder. Luke. She considered letting it go to voicemail. Then she imagined him telling Jenna their mother had become unreachable in a cottage with faulty wiring. What? She answered. Why did you tell Frank Haney you don't have an office? Because I don't. He called me demanding an explanation. I told him to call Celeste. You told him you were fired. I told him I don't work there. That's not how he heard it. Then Frank has become imaginative since yesterday. Luke's breath rushed into the phone. Machinery rumbled behind him. We're trying to make this transition professional. Ruth looked at the ladder, the roof, and her damp shoes. Professionals are usually informed they're transitioning. Can you stop taking shots for 1 minute? We have an installation problem. You have an installation problem. He says Wednesday. Celeste has him Thursday. His sign date is Wednesday. How do you know? Because I scheduled it. Where's the paperwork? She told him. Luke covered the phone and spoke to someone. A drawer opened. Pages turned. Found it, he said at last. But why wasn't it on your digital schedule? I didn't have a digital schedule. You had access to the calendar. You gave me access last month and changed the password 3 days later. I did not. You used Samuel 1961, and the program made you add a symbol. Then you forgot the symbol. Luke went silent. Ruth knew his silence. He was trying to decide whether being wrong required an apology or merely a change of subject. We'll handle Frank, he said. From now on, if customers call you, don't discuss shop business. That was my plan. Then why did you tell him where the work order was? Because he has removed every dish from his kitchen for an installation your office misplaced. So you'll help when you feel like helping. No, Luke. I helped because Frank was caught between your decision and mine. Don't put him there again. She ended the call. The rain strengthened. Ruth tucked her phone beneath the porch and moved the ladder to firmer ground. 6 rungs had frightened her. Perhaps the angle had been wrong. Perhaps the soil had shifted. Perhaps she had simply been tired. She climbed again. At the 5th rung, the ladder gave a faint metallic tick. Ruth stopped. A red truck came down the lane. Dee leaned on the horn once, though there was no chance Ruth had failed to see her. She parked, got out, and stood beside the truck with her hands in her coat pockets. You expecting the roof to come down and meet you? She called. I'm patching it. You're standing on a ladder. That is traditionally how people reach roofs. Traditionally, they put both hands on the ladder. Ruth had one hand clamped around the membrane and the other around a rung. Rain darkened her hair. I'm fine. Dee came closer and put one boot against the ladder's foot. I didn't ask you to hold it. I'm not holding it. I'm preventing it from killing a customer before she can organize my drawer pulls. I'm not your customer anymore. I spent all my money. Then the ladder would be killing a debtor. Worse paperwork. Ruth climbed down. Dee took the membrane from under her arm. There's a wet weather patch compound in the truck. I didn't buy that. I know. You bought the cheap caulk after I told you not to. The cheap caulk was $6 less. And now you can use it on your modest submarine. Ruth wiped rain from her face. I don't need you to fix the roof. Good, because I hate roofs. Then why are you here? I left my delivery clipboard on your porch. The clipboard was visible through the open door. Dee looked at it. And apparently I'm a liar. Ruth almost smiled, which made her angrier. I can do this, she said. Probably. I've done harder things than patch a roof. Probably. Would you stop agreeing with me? No. Dee pulled a second raincoat from the truck and put it on. You can patch that seam alone. You can also fall alone, hurt yourself alone, and lie in the mud feeling very self-reliant until a raccoon eats your shoelaces. I'm not helpless. I didn't say you were. You're acting like it. I'm acting like independence isn't the same thing as performing every task alone. The sentence landed too neatly, as if Dee had used it before. Ruth wondered who had once used it on her. Dee opened the truck bed and removed a coil of rope. Trade, she said. I go up. You secure the ladder and cut membrane. Tomorrow morning, you come to the store and explain why I have -14 garden hoses in inventory. I haven't agreed to work for you. Then think of it as a temporary hostage negotiation. Rain ran off the porch in silver strings. Ruth looked at the roof seam, then at her own hands. They were shaking, though whether from cold or humiliation she could not tell. 2 hours, she said. 3? 2.5. You negotiate like May. So, I've been told. Dee took the ladder. Ruth did not enjoy standing below while another woman climbed. She did not enjoy cutting the membrane, passing up tools, or hearing Dee say, "Good catch," when the compound knife slipped. She especially did not enjoy how quickly the work went once two people were doing it. They covered the lifted seam and the damaged shingles beneath the cedar branch. The branch itself was too large to remove safely in the rain, so Dee tied it back from the roof until Howard could bring a saw. When they finished, both women were soaked. Ruth made coffee in a dented percolator she found in May's pantry. The outlet in the front room powered it without sparks. They sat at the long table, drinking from cups printed with flowers that had faded to gray. Dee peeled wet hair off her forehead. That coffee could dissolve a misdemeanor. You drank yesterday's at the store. Yesterday's had matured. Ruth placed the hardware receipt on the table and smoothed it flat. What does the job pay? Dee named an hourly rate. It was not generous, but it was fair for Bellwether, and considerably more than Ruth had expected. 3 mornings? Ruth asked. 8 to noon. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. More if we like each other less than anticipated. What about the employee price? After 30 days. You offered it this morning. I was dazzled by your personality. First day, 2 weeks. 1. Dee considered. Fine. But you have to operate the register, and you can't chase away toilet seat man. I can't promise that. He owes me money. Ruth folded the receipt in half. I'll come tomorrow. Dee nodded without smiling, which made the agreement feel more legitimate. After she left, Ruth opened the cottage windows a crack to release the damp smell. She laid insulation between exposed studs in the kitchen, measured the broken pane, and wrote each dimension twice. The work quieted her. Near 3, Celeste called. Ruth answered with a utility knife in her hand. Hello. Frank Haney is back on Wednesday. All right. We moved Haverford to Friday. Their stone people admitted the template wasn't ready. Did they apologize? They said there had been a misunderstanding. That means no. Celeste laughed softly, then became quiet. Luke said, You told Frank you were fired. I told Frank I no longer work there. I'm not trying to argue over wording. Good. I didn't know about the apartment. Ruth set down the knife. Celeste continued before Ruth could answer. Luke told me you planned to move closer to Jenna. He said you'd been talking about retirement since Samuel got sick. I said I was tired. That isn't the same thing. No. Rain tapped the newly covered roof. No water fell into the saucepan. I should have talked to you, Celeste said, before I moved anything into the office. Yes? I thought Luke had. He spoke to everyone but me. Celeste let out a breath. I can bring your things from the desk. My things were in a box. I didn't pack them. I know. Another small silence. Some of the staff think I did, Celeste said. Ruth understood then why Celeste had called. Not only guilt, not only kindness. She had walked into the office wearing Luke's decision, and now everyone saw the white chair when they looked at her. What do you want me to say to them? Ruth asked. I don't know. That makes 2 of us. I wanted this job, Ruth. I didn't want it like this. The honesty was inconvenient. Ruth would have preferred Celeste smug. Then do the job well, she said, and make Luke explain his own choices. After the call, Ruth checked the roof patch again. It held. She ate the least damaged corner of the retirement cake for supper and washed it down with tap water that tasted faintly of iron. By dark, the rain had stopped. She slept with 1 extra quilt and woke only twice, once to the raccoon and once because the silence had become unfamiliar. The next morning, Howard arrived carrying chimney rods and a lidded bucket. You own clothes you don't mind ruining? He asked. Ruth looked down at Samuel's work jacket. I own clothes that have already survived a man. That'll do. Clearing the chimney took 2 hours and produced enough soot, leaves, and nesting material to fill most of the bucket. No owl emerged, offended or otherwise. The raccoon watched from an oak tree. Howard installed the stovepipe while Ruth scrubbed soot from the hearth. His hands stiffened in the cold, but he refused assistance until he dropped the same screw 3 times. Ruth picked it up and held it out. I had that, he said. So did I, yesterday with the ladder. Howard took the screw. Dee talks too much, constantly. Going to work for her? I'm evaluating a temporary arrangement. She'll consider that a yes. By 7:45, a small fire burned inside the used stove. Heat began spreading through the kitchen, touching the walls one careful inch at a time. Ruth stood before it with her palms open. Howard closed his tool bag. Receipts are at my place. 4 hours. You keep records like you negotiate? Better. Saturday, she agreed. At 8, Ruth drove into Bellwether for her first shift. She parked beside the laundromat and sat for a moment with both hands resting on the steering wheel. Then she saw Jenna waiting outside the hardware store. Her daughter held a cardboard file box against her hip. Tucked beneath one arm was a glossy folder from the apartment complex. She was staring through the front window at Ruth's new employer, her expression suggesting that the cottage was no longer the only thing her mother had done wrong. Ruth got out of the car and locked it. Though Bellwether did not look like a place where anyone rushed to steal a copy paper box or half a retirement cake. Jenna watched her cross the sidewalk. You're working here? Good morning to you, too. I called last night. I was asleep. At 8:30, there was nothing on television. Jenna shifted the box against her hip. She had changed out of the soft clothes she wore at home and into black pants, ankle boots, and a belted camel coat. She looked prepared to negotiate a merger. What's in the box? Ruth asked. Things you might need. Your bank statements, some mail, the small photo album from the living room. I brought towels and your prescriptions from the bathroom. I didn't ask you to pack my bathroom. I didn't pack it. I took 2 bottles. Which 2? The blood pressure one and the little white one. They're both little and white. Jenna's mouth tightened. This is exactly why I'm worried. Because pharmaceutical companies lack imagination? Because you're living in a condemned shack and taking shifts at a hardware store 3 days after you were supposed to retire. The cottage isn't condemned. It should be. On what basis? It has a raccoon. Luke has squirrels. Nobody's condemned him. The hardware store door opened behind Jenna. Dee came out carrying a bucket of rock salt. Morning, she said. This is my daughter, Jenna, Ruth said. She's conducting an inspection. Dee set the bucket beside the entrance. City, county, or maternal? Familial, Jenna said. Worst kind. They never bring forms. Jenna looked from Dee to Ruth. Her gaze settled on Samuel's work jacket, which Ruth had worn again because it was warm and already smelled of soot. Can we speak privately? She asked. I start at 8. It's 7:52. Dee checked a watch she was not wearing. She's right. Ruth took the box from Jenna and set it inside her car. The glossy folder remained under Jenna's arm. A photograph on the front showed 2 silver-haired women laughing over a puzzle neither appeared to be looking at. I made an appointment for Friday, Jenna said. With whom? The leasing manager. You don't have to sign anything. Just look. I've looked at a house this week. May's Cottage is not a serious option. I spent $900 making it one. Jenna stared. You did what? The roof is patched. The well runs. I bought a stove. With all your money? Nearly. Oh my God, don't bring him into it. He didn't offer to help with the chimney. Jenna lowered her voice. What are you trying to prove? Ruth had asked herself the same thing while shivering beneath May's quilts. The answer kept changing. That I get to decide where I live. Nobody said you didn't. You made an appointment for an apartment I didn't choose, packed my medicine, and drove an hour to stand between me and my first day at a job. I'm trying to keep you from making some huge decision because you're angry at Luke. Luke made the huge decision. He handled it badly. He removed my income and housing on the same morning. I told him he should have given you more notice. Notice. Ruth tasted the word. Jenna's face softened. Mom, that's not what I meant. The store bell rang as Dee went back inside. A man in paint-spattered pants tried the door, found it open, and held it for Jenna. She stepped aside. Ruth said, You thought the decision was fine. You only disliked the delivery. I thought you were exhausted. I was. You complained about the shop constantly. I complained about your father for 39 years. I didn't want him replaced with a white chair. Jenna looked toward the window. Through the glass, Dee was turning on lights one row at a time. After Dad died, Jenna said, You stopped coming over unless I needed something. Ruth opened her mouth, then closed it. You worked every weekend, Jenna continued. If I asked you to dinner, you said payroll or inventory, or some customer had changed a finish. Then you'd show up when my sink leaked or I needed curtains hemmed. You asked me to hem them. I also asked you to stay. Ruth remembered the curtains. Jenna had ordered linen panels too long for her windows. Ruth had spent an afternoon measuring, pinning, and sewing at the dining table. When she finished, Jenna opened wine. Ruth said she had invoices waiting and left before dinner. The memory did not arrange itself in Ruth's favor. You could have said that, she said. I did. No. You said, you could stay. That sounds optional. It was optional. Then don't punish me for choosing. I'm not punishing you. I'm scared you're going to disappear into that place just to show Luke he can't control you. Ruth looked at her daughter. Jenna's anger was real, but beneath it was the frightened expression she had worn in the hospital, whenever Samuel's machines changed rhythm. You know where the cottage is, Ruth said. You can come. You want me there? When you're coming to visit me, not relocate me. Jenna's fingers tightened around the apartment folder. I'm leaving this in your car. No, just read it. No? Why not? Because if it's in my car, you'll call and ask whether I read it. Then you'll tell Luke I'm refusing to consider reasonable options. Then the two of you will have another meeting about me. Jenna flinched. Ruth regretted the accuracy, but not the sentence. She glanced at the store clock. I have to work. At a hardware store. Yes. You ran a business. Apparently I provided general office assistance. You know that isn't true. Then someone should have mentioned it. Monday. Jenna stood on the sidewalk as Ruth went inside. Dee handed Ruth a green canvas apron. Bellwether. Hardware was embroidered across the chest in crooked yellow letters. You want 5 minutes? Dee asked. No. Good. Paintman's been waiting 7, and he considers that oppression. The first hour humbled Ruth efficiently. The register was older than Luke, but newer than anything Ruth trusted. It required 3 buttons to process a check and made a noise like a game show buzzer whenever she pressed the wrong one. She charged Paintman for 14 drop cloths instead of 4, and had to call Dee to reverse it. A woman buying cabinet knobs asked whether Ruth was new. Painfully, Ruth said. At 9:15, toilet seat man returned for furnace filters. He recognized Ruth from the previous day and leaned over the counter. She tell you about me? Only the part where you tried to return something personal. It didn't fit. I'm not entering that discussion before lunch. He bought the filters. The store's disorder began to reveal patterns. Dee did not stock items where the computer said they belonged. She stocked them where customers were most likely to ask for them. Flashlights hung near plumbing because pipes burst in the dark. Work gloves sat in 3 different aisles because people forgot them in lumber, garden, and paint. The system was not senseless. It was simply stored in D. Ruth understood that kind of system. She found the missing drawer pulls in 2 cartons labeled display hooks. Dee had counted the cartons as 12 units each, though each carton contained 12 boxes of 10. So we don't have -14, Dee said. You have 226. That sounds excessive. You ordered 600. I panicked. Ruth entered the correction. You need receiving sheets. I have receiving sheets. You have loose paper. Same ancestors. At 10, Howard came in for wire nuts. A streak of soot remained near his left ear. You missed a spot, Ruth told him. He touched the wrong side of his face. Better? Perfect. He set 2 packets on the counter. Put these on my account? Dee called from the latter aisle. His account is the cigar box under the register. Ruth found the box. It contained folded invoices, cash, 3 fishing lures, and a small wrench. Howard looked almost apologetic. It got away from us. Who's us? Me and every person who has ever put something in that box. She wrote him a proper charge slip. At noon, Dee handed Ruth a paper bag. Jenna left this. Inside were 2 towels, Ruth's medication, the small photo album, a bag of apples, cheese, crackers, coffee, and a jar of peanut butter. The apartment folder was not there. A note rested on top. I heard what you said. I'm still worried. Please eat something that isn't cake. Ruth folded the note once and put it in her pocket. Family inspection pass? Dee asked. Provisional. Those are the only kind. Ruth worked again Friday. Her survivor's payment arrived that morning, and she stopped at the grocery store before driving to Bellwether. She bought eggs, soup, bread, oatmeal, and a piece of salmon that cost more than she thought any fish had a right to. At the hardware store, she reconciled the register, created a receiving form, and discovered Dee had been paying 2 companies for identical trash service. Dee stared at the invoices. I wondered why they were so eager. You've paid both for 11 months. Can I get it back? You can ask. I hate asking. You own a retail business. I like telling. The work left Ruth tired in a clean, ordinary way. At the shop, Tiredness had always followed her upstairs because the job was never finished. Bellwether Hardware closed its register at 5, whether every hinge had found its proper bin or not. Saturday morning, she drove to Howard's place for the promised 4 hours. His farmhouse sat across the river from May's cottage, surrounded by rusting equipment arranged with enough care to suggest each piece was waiting for a decision. Howard led her to a back room containing a desk, 3 filing cabinets, and receipts and grocery bags. Ruth stood in the doorway. "You said 3 rooms. I consolidated. This is consolidated. You should have seen Thursday." She removed her coat. "We need boxes. 1 for expenses, 1 for income, 1 for statements. 1 for things you kept because you're emotionally attached to paper." "I'm not emotionally attached." Ruth picked up a receipt dated 9 years earlier. Howard took it from her. "That's different." For 3 hours they worked with the radio playing softly from the kitchen. Howard made coffee and burned the first pot. Ruth found unpaid invoices he had no intention of collecting and checks he had forgotten to deposit until they expired. She did not scold. Samuel had hidden overdue bills beneath his truck seat as if darkness postponed them. At the bottom of one grocery bag, she found invoices written in a woman's careful blue handwriting. Howard reached for them. "My wife did the books," he said. Ruth let him take the stack. "How long?" she asked. 6 years. There was no need to ask what he meant. Howard placed the invoices in the proper box. After Linda died, people kept saying I needed a system, as if grief was a filing problem. Ruth looked at the bags covering the floor. "Sometimes it becomes one," she said. Her phone rang. Luke's name appeared. Ruth let it ring twice before answering. "Mom," he said, "I need you at the shop Monday morning. Not could you. Not are you free. Need." Ruth looked at Howard's boxes, each one labeled in her handwriting. "I'm working Monday morning." Luke gave a short laugh. "Jenna told me about the hardware store. This is more important." Ruth uncapped her marker. "To you," she said. "It's more important to you." "Celeste has spent all morning trying to reconstruct the purchasing system," Luke said. "We've got supplier orders that don't match the job sheets. They match. They don't. They match if you include the revisions clipped behind each estimate. We shouldn't need a treasure map to order hinges. It isn't a treasure map. It's paper." "Exactly. Celeste is moving everything into one system, and she needs you to walk her through what's outstanding." Ruth wrote statements on the 4th box and underlined it. "How long?" she asked. "A couple hours. Maybe the morning." "What are you paying?" The line went silent. Howard looked up from a grocery bag full of receipts, then looked down again. Luke said, "You're asking me to pay you to explain your own system?" "It stopped being my system Monday." "Mom, my consulting rate is $35 an hour. 4-hour minimum. You made that up just now. All rates are made up at some point. You know we're family. I knew that when you stopped my paycheck." Howard rose and carried the empty coffee pot into the kitchen. He moved slowly enough to make clear he was giving her privacy, but not so slowly that it became theatrical. Luke lowered his voice. "You want to punish me? Fine. But you're punishing Celeste too. Celeste didn't call. She shouldn't have to. If she's running the office, she can decide whether she needs help. I own the business. Then you can decide whether to pay for it." Luke breathed into the phone. Ruth imagined his hand covering his eyes. That image pulled at her. She knew what he looked like when work overwhelmed him. She knew how quickly his neck reddened, how he skipped lunch, how a single delayed delivery became evidence that everything was collapsing. For years, she had stepped in before he needed to ask. The urge to do it again rose with almost physical force. She capped the marker. "I'm not available Monday morning," she said. "I work 8 to noon. You're choosing D. Walsh's cash register over Dad's business." "No, you chose someone else for Dad's business. I'm honoring your decision." She hung up before her voice could shake. Howard returned with fresh coffee. "You done?" he asked. "With him or the receipts?" "Either, not remotely." He set a cup beside her. "Linda and I had 1 son." Ruth waited, but Howard said nothing else. "Had?" she asked finally. "He moved to Washington State 23 years ago. Calls Sundays, weather permitting." "Whose weather?" "Depends who doesn't feel like talking." Ruth sorted fuel receipts by month. "You don't have to tell me things because you overheard my phone call. I wasn't. I'm telling you because you labeled a box, things Howard refuses to throw away. That box is full. It'll need another. They worked until the 4 hours were up. Ruth stopped precisely at noon and showed Howard what remained. He inspected the labeled boxes. This looks worse. It looks visible. That's usually worse. You have 2 years of bank statements missing. They're online. Do you know the password? Yes. What is it? I know roughly what the password is. Ruth put on her coat. Another 4 hours next Saturday. I only owe you 4. You owe me a kitchen circuit. 4 for the chimney and stove. We didn't agree on the wiring. Then quote the wiring. He did. Ruth wrote the figure in a small notebook she had begun using for the cottage. On the first page, she had listed the $900 purchase. Beneath it were Dee's 2.5 roof hours, Howard's chimney work, stove installation, and Ruth's receipt sorting. Nothing would blur into favors if she could help it. I'll give you 12 hours on the books, she said. 10. You said the wiring would take 14. My hands make it 14. Then 14. Howard studied her. You charge more than I do. I'm better at receipts than you are at electricity. That is probably true. They settled on 12 hours of sorting for the kitchen circuit and 2 safe outlets in the bedroom. Materials would be separate, paid over time. Howard signed the ledger with a dramatic flourish that made his name nearly illegible. You forgot how to write? Ruth asked. I was expressing myself. Do it legibly. He signed again. Before leaving, she helped him stack the sorted boxes against the wall. On top of the last one lay a photograph that had slipped from an envelope. Howard and Linda stood beside the green pickup, younger by 20 years. Linda was laughing at something outside the frame. Howard had been looking at her instead of the camera. Ruth placed the photograph face up on the desk. At the cottage, the roof patch still held. The little stove had warmed the kitchen enough that the damp smell was retreating into corners. Ruth opened Jenna's small photo album and set one picture on May's mantel, Samuel at 40, squinting in sunlight, one hand raised as if he could block the photographer by refusing to see her. She did not place the picture of all 4 Danners beside it. Not yet. The weekend passed in small labors. Ruth cleaned cupboards, trapped 2 mice, and removed a strip of wallpaper that had concealed no treasure, only mildew and a pencil note from May reading, "This paper was a mistake." Ruth left the note exposed. She drove to the apartment above the shop Sunday evening while the business was closed. Her key still worked. The rooms looked exactly as she had left them, except for the missing things Jenna had carried away. Samuel's boots waited beneath the hooks. Ruth picked them up, wiped dust from the toes, and put them in a box with 2 lamps, her winter clothes, and the good kitchen knives. She found the retirement balloons in the trash downstairs. They had begun to sag, their bright lettering wrinkled and unreadable. On Monday morning, she reported to Bellwether Hardware at 7:55. Dee had left a note on the register. Customer named Lorna picking up hinges. Do not let me order anything until you find the last order. Ruth found the last order beneath a seed catalog. Dee had purchased 84 hinges instead of 48 because she had reversed the numbers on the phone. At 9:15, Luke called. Ruth let it ring. At 9:20, he called again. Dee glanced toward the phone. Emergency? He has 13 employees, an office manager, and 2 working hands. Then, probably not. At 11, Celeste sent a message. I told Luke I'll contact you myself if I need consulting help. Ruth read it twice before putting the phone away. Good, she thought. Then, after a moment, good for you. Howard rewired the kitchen in stages over the next 2 evenings. He worked from a wooden stool when his knees hurt and made Ruth shut off the main breaker herself each time so she would know how. They argued about outlet height, the proper way to coil wire, and whether coffee left on the stove for 3 hours remained coffee. By Wednesday, the kitchen light operated independently of the bathroom. Ruth turned it on and off 6 times. Howard sat at May's table, flexing his fingers. You keep doing that, you'll wear out the switch, he said. I'm testing it. Test passed 4 times ago. She wrote 2 hours beside his name in the ledger. You were here 2.5. Half hour was coffee. I made the coffee, I drank it. That was labor. The front door opened before Ruth could answer. Celeste stood on the porch with one hand still raised from knocking. She wore her cream sweater beneath a dark coat. Mud speckled the ankles of her navy slacks. Behind her, parked beside Ruth's car, was Luke's truck. Ruth looked past her. Is Luke here? No, mine wouldn't start. Howard closed his tool bag. I'm leaving before this becomes family. You're already in the ledger, Ruth said. That's business. He nodded politely to Celeste on his way out. She stepped aside, watching him cross the yard. "I didn't know anyone was here," she said. "He's fixing the wiring." Celeste looked around the kitchen. The insulation remained exposed between studs. Tools covered one end of May's table. Ruth's bowl of vegetable soup had gone cold beside a pane of glass she was measuring for the bedroom window. "I can see that. If you came to ask about the purchase orders, my rate is still 35. I didn't." Celeste unbuttoned her coat but did not remove it. Ruth waited. "Luke thinks I'm here to ask you to come back," Celeste said. "He told me it would undermine me." "Would it?" "Yes." The answer came so quickly that Ruth's annoyance softened despite itself. Celeste sat at the table, choosing the chair farthest from Ruth's cold soup. "The shop isn't falling apart." "I didn't say it was. People think I don't know what I'm doing. Do you? I know accounting, I know payroll, I can learn scheduling." She glanced at the exposed wall. "I don't know why Raymond's hours were split between finishing and installation when he worked in neither department. Because Luke wanted to keep him, without admitting Samuel had been right about hiring him." Celeste stared. "Raymond repaired mistakes," Ruth said. "He went wherever somebody measured wrong and kept quiet about it. That's not a job category, it's a job." Celeste took this in. "Eddie won't tell me things like that. Eddie doesn't trust you. I noticed. He thinks you packed my box. I didn't." "I know. Does he? Have you told him?" Celeste looked down at her hands. "That sounds petty." "The truth often does when it arrives late." The stove clicked softly as it cooled. Celeste lifted her head. "Luke told me you were ready to leave. He said you were staying because nobody else understood the work, and that every time he tried to update something, you took it personally. Did you believe him?" "Yes." The answer hurt more than an excuse would have. Celeste did not look away. "I also wanted to believe him. I've spent 11 years being introduced as Luke's wife. I have a degree I barely use and a tax season job everybody calls my little side thing. He said the shop needed someone like me. It might. I wanted the job. You said that already. I need you to understand that wanting it doesn't mean I wanted you humiliated." Ruth picked up the window measurement, checked it, and wrote the number again. "You sat in the chair," she said. "I know. You could have waited. I know. And I could have asked you what Luke told you before deciding you were pleased with yourself." Celeste gave a tired laugh. "I was pleased with myself. For about 40 minutes. Ruth looked at her then. Celeste's hair had begun escaping its neat twist. A faint streak of printer ink marked the side of her hand. "What happened after 40 minutes?" Eddie asked, where Ruth kept the common sense. Ruth laughed before she could stop herself. Celeste did too, once, then covered her mouth. Neither laugh lasted long, but the room changed. "I don't want you to quit," Ruth said. Celeste lowered her hand. "Luke says you do. Luke says many things on behalf of women he hasn't asked. What do you want?" Ruth looked around May's kitchen. "I want him to own the decision he made. I want you to stop letting him use you as the explanation. And I want my good stapler back." Celeste nodded solemnly. "Black, heavy," says Swingline. "Yes. I thought it was mine. It has a scratch shaped like Tennessee. I'll bring it." She rose, then noticed the pane of glass and the empty window frame leaning against the wall. "You're replacing that yourself?" "I'm attempting to. I've glazed windows." Ruth raised an eyebrow. "My grandfather restored houses. I spent summers scraping putty and resenting him." The offer sat between them. Ruth handed her the putty knife. Celeste removed her cream sweater, folded it carefully over the back of a chair, and rolled up the sleeves of the plain t-shirt beneath it. For the next hour, neither woman mentioned the shop. They worked shoulder to shoulder at May's table, pressing new putty around old wood, while Ruth's soup went cold enough to be forgotten. Celeste ran one finger along the line of putty. "That corner's too thick," Ruth said. "I know. You're adding more. I'm fixing it." "With additional thickness?" Celeste set down the knife. "Would you like to do this yourself?" "No. I'd like you to do it correctly. Luke said you don't know how to let anyone help. Luke once installed a drawer upside down and blamed the plans. That doesn't answer me. It answers Luke." Celeste looked at the corner, scraped away the excess, and smoothed it again. "Better?" Ruth leaned closer. "Yes. Thank you. You're welcome." Both women understood that neither was discussing window putty. Ruth reheated the soup and divided it into 2 bowls. Celeste ate at May's table in her t-shirt, while her cream sweater remained safely beyond the reach of tools. She looked younger without the careful clothes, though Ruth knew she was 38. There was a small crescent-shaped scar above her right elbow that Ruth had never noticed. "Where did you learn accounting?" Ruth asked. "College. I know that." "Why?" "My father believed every woman needed a job she could perform in a building with air conditioning. Sensible. He repaired highways. Less sensible." Celeste smiled. "He came home covered in asphalt and talked about accounting like it was indoor royalty." Ruth tore bread into her soup. "Do you like it?" "I like when numbers refuse to argue about what they mean." "You married poorly." The smile became a laugh. By the time Celeste left, the repaired pane stood safely against the wall. Ruth walked her to Luke's truck. "You shouldn't install it until the putty sets," Celeste said. "I know." "Of course you know. I do." Celeste opened the driver's door, then paused. "Luke's going to ask what we talked about. Tell him. He won't understand why I helped with a window." Then explained glazing slowly. Celeste's face tightened. "He thinks you're trying to make him fail. I'm living in a cottage he called a tax bill with raccoons. If this is my plot against him, it lacks efficiency. I know that." "Does he?" Celeste looked toward the kitchen window, where warm light shone through old glass. "I don't think Luke knows what he thinks yet." The truck disappeared up the lane. Ruth stood outside until the cold reached through Samuel's jacket. The cottage behind her no longer looked entirely abandoned. Light softened the front room. Smoke rose cleanly from the chimney. The roofline remained crooked, but the tarp was gone. She went inside and added Celeste's hour to the ledger. Beside it, she wrote window glazing, unpaid. She stared at the word, then crossed out unpaid and wrote shared. Luke called before Ruth had finished washing the soup bowls. What did Celeste want? "You could ask your wife." "I did." "Then why are you asking me?" "She said you fixed a window." "We did. She drove an hour to talk about the shop, and you put her to work on a cottage." She offered. "What did you tell her?" "That Raymond repairs mistakes, Eddie doesn't trust her, and your mother wants her stapler." "This is serious. So is my stapler. Did you tell her to quit?" "No." The answer stopped him. Ruth dried her hands. "I told her I don't want her to quit." "Why?" It was the most honest word Luke had spoken all week. "Because she wanted the job," Ruth said. "And because replacing her with me would make you the kind of man who learns nothing." "That's not what I'm asking." "I know." Luke's voice hardened. "You're enjoying this." "No." The shop has a rough week, and suddenly everybody remembers how much they need Ruth. "I enjoyed being needed for a long time. That's partly how we got here." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I answered Frank when I shouldn't have. I fixed your problems before you understood they existed. I let that feel like love. Don't turn this into some therapy speech." Ruth looked at May's note, exposed beneath the stripped wallpaper. This paper was a mistake. "All right," she said. "Good night." She hung up. The repaired window went into the bedroom 2 days later. It did not fit on the first attempt. The frame had warped, and Ruth planed one edge too aggressively, leaving a gap that required a thin strip of wood. She called Celeste only to tell her the truth. "We measured twice," Celeste said. "We measured an old house," it lied. "Can I come help?" "No, I fixed it." Ruth heard office sounds behind her, a ringing phone, the printer, Luke asking someone about an invoice. Celeste lowered her voice. "Eddie and Luke had a fight." "About what?" "The installation schedule. Luke wants the crews to add a third stop on Thursdays. That depends on the jobs. That's what Eddie said." Ruth waited. "I'm staying out of it," Celeste added. "Why?" "Because it isn't accounting, it's scheduling, which is apparently my job." There was frustration beneath the words, but also a question. Ruth set the phone on speaker and wiped sawdust from the sill. 3 small service calls can fit. 3 cabinet installations can't. I said that. What did Luke say? That the old schedule was inefficient. Ruth nearly answered with 32 years of proof. Instead, she said, "Then he can test the new one." The following week settled into a pattern that belonged to no one but Ruth. She opened Bellwether Hardware 3 mornings. Dee taught her to cut keys, though the first one Ruth made opened nothing, including the lock it had been copied from. Ruth built a proper receiving station in a corner of the back room and labeled 6 shelves. Dee moved the labels twice before admitting Ruth's arrangement was better. On Tuesday and Thursday, Ruth worked at the cottage. She insulated half the kitchen, scrubbed the front room floor, and repaired the drawer beneath May's table. She took breaks before her hands began shaking, an adjustment she resented less each time. Howard finished the kitchen circuit and 2 bedroom outlets. Ruth completed 8 of the 12 bookkeeping hours, transforming 3 grocery bags into monthly folders. He paid for the wiring materials himself and entered the amount in Ruth's ledger as a balance due. Dee came for supper after 1 shift, with a pot of stew she claimed had become too large by accident. Howard brought bread the next evening, because Dee had told him there would be stew left. Ruth set 3 places at May's table. "This is not becoming a regular event," she said. Dee buttered bread. "Of course not." Howard held out his bowl. "Any more of the irregular stew?" They began eating together on Wednesdays without formally deciding to. Jenna arrived one Sunday carrying work gloves and no apartment folder. Ruth opened the door and looked at the gloves. "I'm visiting," Jenna said. "People don't usually bring gloves to visit. I thought you might have something that needed doing. That sounds dangerously like help. I can leave." Ruth stepped aside. Jenna walked through the cottage slowly. She had not been there since May's funeral. Her gaze moved over the used stove, the exposed insulation, the repaired window, and the tools lying neatly at one end of the table. "It's warmer than I expected," she said. "Try to contain your praise. I'm serious. So am I." They spent an hour scraping the remaining wallpaper from the kitchen wall. Jenna attacked it too hard, gouging the plaster. "You're taking wall with it," Ruth said. "I thought walls were sturdier. This one is mostly determination." Jenna changed her angle. They worked in silence until she uncovered another piece of May's handwriting near the baseboard. "Ran out of paper. Good." Jenna sat back on her heels and laughed. "I forgot how funny she was. You thought she was mean. She was mean." "Sometimes mean people are funny." Ruth handed her a damp sponge. "Your father hated when she wrote on things. Dad hated when anybody treated a house like it belonged to them." The words surprised both of them. Jenna wiped adhesive from the wall. "That sounded terrible. It sounded accurate. I loved him. So did I." "I know." Ruth waited. Jenna set down the sponge. "I helped plan the lunch, I assumed. I ordered the cake. That explains the dent. It was perfect when I picked it up. Then Luke damaged your work. You understand my position." Jenna's eyes filled, but she laughed. "I'm trying to apologize." "Then don't make me help." The laugh disappeared. "I'm sorry," Jenna said. "I thought if we made it nice, you wouldn't feel rejected. You made a rejection nice. I know that now." Ruth sat on the floor opposite her. The plaster dust whitened both their knees. "Why did you agree?" she asked. Jenna looked toward the front room. "Luke said the shop was swallowing you. I thought if you moved near me, we could have dinner without you watching the clock. I thought you'd help with Aunt Marilyn, yes, but I also thought we could just be together. You planned togetherness without me. I was afraid if I asked, you'd say you were too busy." Ruth could not deny it. That made forgiveness harder and easier at once. "You can come to dinner here," she said. "Wednesday." "Who else comes?" "Dee." "Howard." Jenna raised one eyebrow. "Howard? He's an electrician." That didn't answer me. It answered enough. Jenna smiled, and for several minutes they went back to the wall. Ruth's phone rang near noon. Eddie Mercer's name appeared. She stood to answer, brushing dust from her pants. "Ruth," Eddie said. His voice sounded strangely light. "You still got room in your life for people who don't work at Danner? What happened?" "Luke and I came to a professional disagreement." "Meaning?" "Meaning he told me if I couldn't keep up, he'd find someone who could." Ruth closed her eyes. "So, I saved him the trouble." "You quit?" "Friday." "Eddie, I'm 58 years old. I know how long cabinets take to install. Did you give notice?" He gave me 30 minutes to clean my locker. Jenna had stopped scraping. Ruth walked into the front room. "What are you going to do?" "Martinez Finished Carpentry needs a serviceman. Less money, fewer kitchens, no speeches about efficiency. That might suit you?" "Might." He hesitated. "Luke thinks you put me up to it." "Of course he does. I told him you didn't know." "Thank you. I also told him his father would have called him an idiot." "Less helpful." "Probably." After they hung up, Ruth stood at the front window. Jenna came beside her, but did not ask. A truck appeared at the bend in Mays Lane, moving too fast for the ruts. Luke's truck. He stopped behind Jenna's car and got out before the engine had fully settled. Even through the window, Ruth could see the anger in the way he slammed the door. Jenna whispered. He called me twice this morning. Did you answer? No. Good. Luke crossed the yard, looked once at the patched roof, and came onto the porch. He did not knock. He opened the door and saw his mother, his sister, the stripped walls, the warm stove, and 2 scrapers lying on May's table. What did you say to Eddie? He demanded. Ruth reached past him and closed the door against the cold. Then she said, Come in, apparently. Luke stared at her as if closing the door were an act of aggression. What did you tell him? I told Eddie I no longer work at the shop. You know that's not what I'm asking. Then ask a better question. Jenna set down her scraper. Luke, she didn't know Eddie quit. He glanced at the tools in her hands. What are you doing here? Helping Mom. With what? The wall. I can see the wall. Then we're making progress. Luke looked between them. His cheeks were red from the cold, but the color continued down his neck beneath his collar. Ruth knew that meant the anger had started before he arrived. He walked into the kitchen without removing his coat. His gaze moved over the used stove, exposed studs, stacked insulation, and May's long table. Ruth saw him calculating deficiencies. Luke had been trained to enter a room and find what was wrong. Samuel called it craftsmanship. Ruth sometimes called it exhausting. You spent $900 on this? He asked. Not on the whole cottage. They wouldn't let me buy the river. I'm serious. So am I. This place needs $30,000. It needs a roof before winter. The rest can proceed in an orderly fashion. You don't have $30,000. I don't need $30,000 today. You don't even have a proper bathroom. The toilet flushes. I didn't say you should prove it. Jenna turned away, but Ruth caught her smile. Luke noticed. This is funny to you? No, Jenna said. But you came in without knocking and started pricing the walls. I came because Eddie walked out after 31 years. 29, Ruth said. Luke rounded on her. That's your response? He started 2 years after we opened. I don't care about the exact number. That's part of your problem. He stepped closer to the table. Eddie said nobody at Danner respected experience anymore. He said I'd find out what it cost to treat people like replaceable parts. Does that sound familiar? It sounds like Eddie. You put that in his head. Eddie's head is unpleasant, but it is his own. Stop joking. I didn't know until he called 10 minutes ago. Luke looked at Jenna for confirmation. She didn't, Jenna said. His anger lost direction for a moment. He examined the stripped wall, perhaps hoping it had plotted against him too. Then, why did he call you? Because we worked together for 29 years. He worked for me. He worked with us. Dad owned the shop. Dad owned the stock. He didn't own Eddie. Luke slapped one palm against May's table. The tools jumped. Ruth did not raise her voice. Don't hit things in my house. The words stopped all 3 of them. Luke slowly lifted his hand from the table. His face changed, but only briefly. Your house? Yes. You've been here, 2 weeks? Long enough to know where the leaks are. You're making everybody think I threw you into this place. You did throw me out of another one. I gave you a month. How generous. I offered alternatives. You and Jenna selected alternatives, Jenna said. Leave me out of this. Luke stared at her. You helped find the apartment, I know. I apologized. To her? Who else? The betrayal on Luke's face might have been funny if it had not looked so young. So now I'm the villain, he said. No, Ruth answered. You're a man who made a bad decision badly and keeps making it worse because admitting that feels more dangerous than hurting people. Jenna looked down at the scraper in her hand. Luke laughed without humor. You've had plenty of time out here to prepare that. I've had plenty of quiet. He turned toward the mantel and saw Samuel's photograph. For the first time since entering, Luke became still. Ruth knew the picture he was seeing. His father at 40, strong and impatient, hand lifted toward the camera. Luke was nearly 40 now. The resemblance was cruel in the cottage light. He would hate this, Luke said. The cottage, all of it. Your father hated wallpaper, unpaid invoices, and anything with raisins. He was not God. I didn't say he was. You use him like one when you want me to obey. Luke's jaw tightened. He left me the business because he trusted me. He left you the business because you wanted it, and you resent that. Ruth considered the accusation carefully. I resent that both of you acted as though the business appeared fully built the day you inherited it. I've worked there since I was 19, and I've worked there since before you existed. Jenna stepped between them without making it obvious, moving toward the sink for the damp sponge. Luke shook his head. This is what you wanted. You wanted me to come crawling out here and admit I can't run it without you. No. You came shouting. Eddie quits, Frank Haney threatens to cancel. 3 purchase orders are wrong, and Celeste drives out here because she thinks she needs your blessing. You're in the middle of every problem. Celeste came because she wanted to talk, and you put her to work. She's good with windows. That isn't the point. Ruth folded her arms. What is the point? Luke opened his mouth, but no answer arrived. The stove gave a small metallic ping. Ruth saw his eyes move around the kitchen again. This time he noticed the new outlet, the repaired pane waiting against the wall, the hardware ledger, the grocery bag of proper food. He also saw the warped cabinets, the patched ceiling, and the cold doorway leading to the unfinished bedroom. Concern entered his expression and came out sounding like contempt. You cannot live here through winter. Watch me. That isn't a plan. No. The roof, insulation, and wood supply are the plan. Watching is your part. He reached for his keys. You have 2 weeks left upstairs, he said. Take what you want before then. We're changing the locks after the 30 days. I know how a deadline works. Do you? Because this whole thing looks like some kind of performance. Ruth stepped closer to him. For whom? The raccoon? Luke glanced at Jenna. Are you coming? No. I'm finishing the wall. You drove all the way out here to scrape wallpaper? I drove all the way out here to visit Mom. The wallpaper was a trap. For a moment, Ruth thought Luke might smile. His face nearly remembered how. Then he opened the door. I'm not discussing shop business with you again, he said. That would be restful. He went out and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the repaired window. Ruth listened to his truck tear up the lane. Jenna stood beside May's table holding the sponge. Was Dad really that difficult? She asked. Ruth sat down. Your father was generous, vain, funny, impatient, loyal, and convinced that every thought he had was a conclusion. Difficult is a small word. Did he know you were unhappy? I wasn't always unhappy. That wasn't my question. Ruth looked at Samuel's photograph. No, she said. I made sure he didn't. Jenna sat opposite her. Why? Because he was sick. Before that, he was busy. Before that, you and Luke were grown, and I thought we were supposed to be proud of what we'd built. Were you? Yes. The answer surprised Ruth with its certainty. She was proud of the shop. Proud of Samuel's cabinets, Luke's early designs, Jenna answering phones during busy summers, the first company truck, the year they paid every employee through a recession without missing Friday payroll. Pride had not protected her. That did not make it false. I love that life, she said. I just didn't understand how little of it belonged to me. Jenna reached across the table, then stopped before touching Ruth's hand. Ruth turned her palm upward. They sat that way until the cottage cooled and the wall waited long enough. Eddie arrived Wednesday evening carrying a 6-foot oak board on his shoulder. I'm not here to discuss Luke, he announced. You brought lumber, Ruth said. Scrap. Martinez had no use for it. Does Martinez know that? He told me to take it. Dee, already seated at the table with a bowl of stew, pointed her spoon at him. We ask that because Ruth's family owns a cabinet shop, and we're avoiding theft as a theme. Eddie looked at Howard. Who's she? Dee, Howard said. You'll get used to her. I haven't, Ruth said. Jenna had brought cornbread. She set an extra place while Eddie explained that the oak board could replace the soft porch rail. He offered no criticism of Luke and failed so completely that his silence became criticism anyway. Ruth made him write, scrap oak, no charge in the ledger. You keep records of supper too? Eddie asked. Only if you take seconds. He took thirds. The irregular Wednesday meal became crowded. Conversation moved from the proper thickness of cornbread to Dee's drawer pull mistake, Howard's receipts, and whether May's raccoon was male or female. Nobody agreed on anything. Ruth watched Jenna listen to stories about her mother that she had never heard. When Luke's name approached the table, Ruth redirected it. He isn't supper, she said. Leave him off the menu. After everyone left, she stood on the porch with Eddie's oak board propped against the wall. The cottage windows glowed behind her. 5 bowls waited in the sink. For once, the evidence of being needed did not feel like a bill. Friday brought a hard wind from the river. Ruth returned from the hardware store to find the temporary roof membrane lifting at one corner. The cedar branch had torn free of its rope and scraped across the patch. She climbed only 3 ladder rungs before stopping. The old anger rose. So did the old temptation to continue until her body surrendered first. She climbed down. Ruth called Dee, but the store was handling a burst pipe emergency and could spare no one. Howard's hands had swollen after 2 days of wiring. Eddie had started his new job and was an hour away. Rain was forecast overnight. Ruth stood in the yard, with cold wind pushing Samuel's jacket against her back. Asking had not made help appear. Accepting limits had not made the problem disappear. She opened the ledger on May's table and studied what she could trade, afford, postpone, or do from the ground. Then her phone buzzed. A message from Celeste showed a photograph of Ruth's black stapler sitting on the white office chair. Under it, Celeste had written, "I'm coming your way after work. Need anything?" Ruth looked up at the loose membrane beating against the roof. She typed, "Bring clothes you don't mind ruining." Celeste arrived wearing faded jeans, work boots, and a rain jacket that looked newly purchased. "You bought clothes you don't mind ruining," Ruth said. "I bought clothes I'm willing to pretend I don't mind ruining." She held out the black stapler. Ruth took it. The familiar weight settled into her palm. A long scratch curved across its base like the state line above Tennessee. "You cleaned it." There was sawdust in the hinge. "It's a shop stapler." It was also sticky. Ruth pressed it once. The staple entered May's table pad with a satisfying snap. "Thank you." Celeste looked toward the roof. The loose membrane cracked in the wind. "That's what I'm here for?" "It's that or the raccoon. I'll take the roof." The wind was too strong to climb safely. Ruth had already accepted that, though she disliked hearing Celeste reach the same conclusion. They carried May's ladder to the kitchen side and waded through the worst gusts. Celeste studied the lifted corner from below. "If we can get a rope over the ridge, we can pull the membrane flat from the other side. And secure it how? Roofing screws through a board at the edge. We only need to reach the bottom course." Ruth looked at her. "Your grandfather? He restored houses and believed granddaughters existed to stand on ladders. Did he pay you?" "He said knowledge was payment. Men are very creative with currency." They tied a wrench to the rope and threw it over the roof. The first attempt landed in the gutter. The second nearly struck the raccoon, which fled into the oak with an opinion about it. On the fourth attempt, the wrench cleared the ridge and dropped into the yard. They worked one side at a time, pulling the membrane flat while the other held tension. Celeste climbed high enough to fasten the lower edge beneath a narrow board. Ruth kept both hands on the ladder. "Don't look down," she said. "I wasn't." "Good. I was looking at the porch, which is also down." "Celeste, I'm fastening it." The first drops began as they drove the final screw. They carried the ladder beneath the porch and stood there breathing hard while rain swept across the yard. Celeste pushed wet hair from her face. "Will it hold?" "Tonight." That wasn't the question. "Tonight is what I can promise." Inside, Ruth fed the stove and reheated soup. Celeste peeled off her rain jacket and hung it beside Samuel's. The two coats dripped onto the floor together. "You could have called Luke," Celeste said. Ruth handed her a towel. "So could you. I told him I was coming." "What did he say?" "That you had people for this now." Ruth opened the bread bag. "People. Dee, Howard, Eddie, Jenna, apparently. You're here. I don't think he counts me as your people. Do you?" Celeste rubbed her hair with the towel. "I'm holding off until I see if the roof leaks." They ate while rain struck the new patch. Ruth placed the saucepan beneath the old leak out of caution. It remained empty. Celeste watched it. "Luke lost the Bramwell job," she said. Ruth knew the name. Bramwell Development ordered cabinets for expensive townhouses and demanded discounts as if volume were a personality. Why? They moved the completion date up 6 weeks. Luke said we could meet it. Production said we couldn't. Bramwell found another shop. Then he didn't lose it. He declined to lie. He didn't decline. He said yes until they asked for a written schedule. Ruth spread butter on her bread. That's different. The Price Kitchen canceled too. "Howard. No relation?" Celeste smiled faintly. "The Price is on Mill Road. They got nervous after Eddie left." "Did Eddie call them?" "No. They called for him." Ruth heard Luke in every silence that followed. She imagined him walking the shop after hours, checking machines, as if one of them might explain why authority had not produced control. "Are you telling me because you want help?" she asked. "I'm telling you because if I go home and say it all out loud, Luke hears blame. Is it blame? Some. The stove shifted with a soft fall of wood. Celeste put down her spoon. I asked him to hire a production manager. What did he say? That's his job. What does he think his job is? All of them. Ruth smiled without amusement. Samuel trained him well. I asked whether we could pay you for 6 hours to review open orders. He said no. Then no? I can approve 6 hours. Behind his back, I run the office. Do you? Celeste's face closed. Ruth regretted the question, but not enough to withdraw it. If I work for the shop, Ruth said, Luke knows, the rate is written down, and everybody understands when it ends. I won't become the thing you two fight about after dinner. You already are. That doesn't mean I have to invoice for it. Celeste laughed once. The rain continued. No water fell into the saucepan. When Celeste left, Ruth entered 2.5 hours beside her name in the ledger. She wrote roof assistance and put shared in the value column. The 30-day deadline arrived with no ceremony. Ruth borrowed Dee's delivery truck and drove to the shop before opening. Jenna met her in the gravel lot wearing old jeans. Howard came too, though Ruth had told him the furniture was light. His hands were having a good morning, he said, which did not answer why he had come. The apartment looked abandoned before they touched anything. Ruth had already taken her clothes and kitchen necessities. What remained belonged mostly to the life that had ended. Samuel's recliner, boxes of trade magazines, wedding china they had used exactly twice, a sideboard too large for the cottage, and 40 years of objects that had survived because no decision had been urgent. Ruth took the lamps, the good knives, family photographs, her sewing machine, and Samuel's boots. She left the recliner. Jenna ran one hand over its worn arm. You sure? It smells like him. That's why I thought you'd want it. That's why I don't. Jenna nodded and taped the box in front of her. Howard carried the sewing machine downstairs. Dee arrived late with coffee and an unnecessary number of moving blankets. At 7:15, Eddie pulled into the lot. Ruth stared through the apartment window. Who called Eddie? Nobody answered. Dee. I mentioned it at the store. This is not a barn raising. Correct. No barn. Eddie climbed the stairs. I'm here for the sideboard. I'm not taking it. I am. You don't need a sideboard. My sister does. Does she know? She will. By 8, Danner employees began arriving. They slowed when they saw the truck. Tasha came upstairs and silently wrapped the china. Frank from finishing carried boxes. Raymond stood in the doorway until Ruth handed him the wedding photographs. Luke arrived last. He parked Samuel's truck beside Dee's delivery vehicle and sat behind the wheel for several seconds. Celeste got out of the passenger side. She crossed the lot and came upstairs without waiting for him. I brought tape, she said. We have tape, Luke said from behind her. Everyone became interested in what they were holding. Ruth folded the flaps of a box. Good morning. Luke looked around the half-empty apartment. You could have told me you were doing this today. The deadline is today. I know. You said the locks would change. I wasn't going to change them at 8 in the morning. That would have been difficult with all these people in the way. Dee picked up 2 boxes and went downstairs. The others followed with the relieved speed of people escaping weather. Luke remained. His gaze stopped on Samuel's recliner. You're leaving Dad's chair? Yes, you can't. I just did. We should keep it. You keep it. I don't have room. Neither do I. He put one hand on the chair back. You could put it in storage. And pay each month so neither of us has to decide. It was his. So were the boots. I chose the boots. Luke looked toward the door, where Howard's shoulder disappeared down the stairs carrying them. Who is that man? Howard. I know his name. Then you're ahead. Jenna says he's always at the cottage. Jenna has been there twice. You know what I mean. Ruth picked up the last box. No, but I know the tone. Luke stepped aside. You replaced Dad pretty fast. The box cut into Ruth's arms. For one hot second, she wanted to set it down and slap him. The desire was so clean that it steadied her. Your father died 18 months ago, she said. Howard fixed my wiring. If that is marriage to you, Celeste has been overqualified for years. Luke's face reddened. Ruth carried the box downstairs. The office door stood open. Celeste's white chair was tucked behind Samuel's desk. Ruth's black stapler sat on the corner nearest the visitor chair, not claimed by either woman. Employees gathered near the loading bay. Nobody seemed to know whether to say goodbye again. Ruth placed the apartment key on the office desk. Luke came down behind her. You can keep it until tonight, he said. I'm finished. She looked at Celeste. The Madison estimate is still upstairs in the second kitchen drawer. I found it behind the takeout menus. Celeste nodded. Thank you. Ruth turned toward the loading bay. Eddie raised one hand. Tasha crossed the floor and hugged her. Raymond looked close to tears and furious about it. Ruth hugged him too. Luke watched all of this from the office door. Outside, Howard and Dee were securing the load. Jenna stood beside Samuel's boots in the truck bed, one hand resting on the wooden tag attached to May's brass key. Ruth climbed into the passenger seat. As Dee pulled away, she saw Luke in the side mirror. He stood alone in the gravel lot, holding the apartment key Ruth no longer needed. The cottage was crowded with boxes when they returned. The roof had held through the night, but the repair looked temporary because it was. Ruth placed Samuel's boots beneath May's coat hooks. They fit there without explanation. On top of the final box lay the small wooden production calendar Luke had removed from the shop wall. It was not Ruth's handwritten paper schedule, but the oak-framed holder Samuel had built for it, its grooves worn smooth from years of changing dates. She lifted it out. "Who packed this?" she asked. No one answered. Ruth looked from Jenna to Dee, Howard, and Eddie. Eddie cleared his throat. It was in the trash pile. "Did Luke say you could take it?" He said, "Throw everything by the back door away." Ruth ran her thumb over Samuel's initials burned into one corner. Then she carried the empty frame inside and leaned it against the wall behind May's table, where it could no longer tell anyone what had to happen next. The empty frame remained behind May's table for 3 days before Ruth decided she hated it there. It made every meal look scheduled. She moved it to the bedroom, where it leaned between the wall and Samuel's box of trade magazines. Then she moved it to the closet. By Friday, it was back in the front room because the closet smelled damp. "Burn it," Dee said. "You don't burn oak. You burn whatever improves the room." Howard examined Samuel's initials in the corner. "Good joints. He could build anything square," Ruth said. "Except this cottage. He never tried." The sentence stayed with her. The cottage had become crowded overnight. Boxes narrowed the front room to a path. Her sewing machine occupied one chair. The lamps had no tables, the photographs had no shelves, and the good knives waited in a dishpan because the kitchen drawers still stuck. Ruth spent her next days off making decisions. She kept one set of wedding china and gave the rest to Dee, who claimed Bellwether Hardware needed formal place settings for inventory night. She threw away Samuel's trade magazines, except for the issue containing a photograph of Danner Woodwork's first commercial installation. She kept his boots, one jacket, 2 shirts, and the wooden level he had refused to replace after the bubble became inaccurate. The level hung above the kitchen door. "It's crooked," Jenna said at Wednesday supper. "The level or the door?" Yes. Jenna had begun coming every other Wednesday. She brought cornbread the first time, salad the second, and store-bought pie the third. Dee lifted one forkful of pie and inspected it. "What flavor is this supposed to be?" "Apple. Why is it orange?" "Seasonal spices." Howard ate his without comment. Celeste sat beside Ruth, wearing a sweater she had wisely kept away from the work table. It was her first Wednesday meal. She had arrived carrying nothing but Ruth's stapler, then remembered she had already returned it, and looked so embarrassed that Ruth invited her in. Luke had not come. His absence occupied no chair, but everyone avoided placing a plate where one might have been. Eddie talked about his new job. Martinez finished carpentry allowed him to schedule service calls himself, and had discovered, with gratifying speed, that he could repair work other installers considered hopeless. "Less money," he said. "But nobody sends me to 3 counties before lunch." "Luke hired anyone?" Ruth asked. Celeste answered. 2 installers. Eddie grunted. "Do they know what they're doing?" Ruth asked. "One does," Celeste said. "And the other owns impressive boots." Dee pointed her fork at Howard. "Proof boots mean nothing." Howard looked down at his worn shoes. "I'm not involved." Conversation moved elsewhere, but Ruth noticed Celeste rubbing the side of her thumb, a nervous habit she had never seen before the office became hers. After the others left, Celeste stayed to help wash dishes. "You don't have to report on the shop," Ruth said. "I know. You look like you're carrying it around in your mouth." Celeste dried a bowl. "Luke is sleeping in the office some nights. He does that when he's overwhelmed. He says he's catching up." "Same thing. He won't hire a production manager. He says Eddie leaving made everybody think they can challenge him." Ruth placed a clean plate in the cupboard. "Can they?" "That's what I asked." What did he say? He slept in the office. Ruth shut the cupboard too hard. He won't pay my consulting rate, she said. I know, I won't work secretly. I know that too. Then why are you telling me? Celeste folded the dish towel over the oven handle. Because I don't know who else understands what's happening without wanting something from him. Ruth leaned against the sink. Luke had spent his life interpreting advice as a judgment of whether he deserved the business. Samuel had created that wound, then kept touching it to see if it still hurt. Ruth had soothed it so often that Luke never learned to dress it himself. I want something, she said. What? I want him to admit I was working. Celeste nodded. That's fair. It doesn't feel fair. No, it feels expensive. The roof estimate arrived the following morning. A local contractor named Ben Alvarez spent 40 minutes measuring, probing soft boards, and taking photographs. He was patient, serious, and unwilling to pretend the temporary patch would survive a full winter. Could last until spring, he said. Could come off next Tuesday. That's not useful. Roofs rarely coordinate with budgets. His price was $8,400, including removal, repairs to the kitchen decking, and new shingles. Ruth's hardware wages could not reach that by winter. Her survivor's payment covered property tax, insurance, food, fuel, and little else. Even if she saved every available dollar, the roof remained months away. Ben offered to replace only the worst section for less, but joining new material to the failing old roof would waste money later. Ruth thanked him and wrote the estimate in her ledger. For one entire afternoon, she hated the cottage. She hated its soft boards, swollen cabinets, crooked walls, and appetite for money. She hated Samuel for never trying, May for dying before finishing, and Luke for being correct when he said she could not afford it. She sat on the porch step until cold came through her jeans. Then she opened the ledger again. The temporary patch could be strengthened. The cedar branch could be removed. More attic insulation would reduce the heat escaping beneath the roof. None of those things solved $8,400. They bought time. Time was not a miracle. It was still worth buying. Dee added a Saturday shift at the store. Ruth accepted before pride could dress itself as exhaustion. She set aside every dollar from Bellwether in a savings envelope labeled Roof and hid it in the peppermint tin. Howard and Eddie removed the cedar branch. Ruth paid Eddie with 2 hours of help preparing invoices for his new service work. Howard refused payment for standing on the ground and giving opinions, so Ruth put 1 jar of homemade soup in his truck when he was not looking. He returned the empty jar with 3 split logs inside it. You put firewood in my jar, Ruth said. Couldn't find the lid. The lid was under your seat. Then you know where it is? She bought insulation at Dee's employee price and installed it in stages. Jenna helped when she could, though she complained that fiberglass found places on the body it had not been invited. Celeste repaired the swollen cabinet doors one evening after work. The cottage improved by inches. The front room floor emerged beneath layers of grime, honey-colored and deeply scratched. The repaired bedroom window stopped rattling. The well water ran clear after Ruth flushed the system every morning for a week. She hung curtains made from old linen tablecloths and placed 1 lamp beside May's sofa. The sofa still smelled faintly of bacon grease. Dee had not lied. Luke remained silent. He did not call about the shop, the cottage, or the family supper Jenna proposed for the Sunday before Thanksgiving. Jenna invited Ruth as a guest and asked her to bring 1 pie. Only 1, Ruth said. I'm making the rest. You don't make pie. I own a cookbook. That isn't the same. Bring 1 pie, Mom. Ruth did. At Jenna's house, Luke arrived with Celeste 20 minutes late. He hugged Ruth stiffly and complimented the pie as if speaking to someone whose name he had forgotten. Celeste brought rolls. Aunt Marilyn drove herself and announced that anyone who tried to arrange transportation for her again would be removed from her will, which contained, she added, $11 and a humidifier. Dinner survived. Luke talked about lumber costs, Jenna's new patio, and Samuel's habit of overcooking turkey. He did not mention Danner Woodworks. Ruth did not ask. When Jenna served dessert, Luke chose store-bought pecan instead of Ruth's apple. It should not have mattered. It did. On the drive home, Ruth was angry with herself for caring. She had set boundaries, surrendered keys, earned wages, and learned to accept a hand on a ladder. None of it had made her immune to her son choosing the other pie. The cottage was dark when she reached it. She turned on the kitchen light Howard had wired and stood beneath it, coat still buttoned. A drip sounded. Ruth looked at the saucepan. Empty. Another drip came from the bedroom. The temporary patch had held, but water had found a new path along the old decking. A dark line ran above the window and down the wall. Ruth placed a bowl beneath it, climbed into bed, and listened. The loneliness that night had weight. It did not mean she had made the wrong choice. That was almost worse. Right choices could still hurt. She worked Saturday at the hardware store, spent Sunday sealing the new leak from inside, and returned Monday to find Dee waiting with a clipboard. "You're balancing my quarterly inventory," Dee said. "I work mornings. I'm paying overtime. I don't want overtime. You want a roof." Ruth took the clipboard. At noon, she found a customer waiting near the register. Mrs. Calder had ordered cabinets from Danner Woodworks twice in 20 years. She hugged Ruth before Ruth could defend herself. "I heard you're not there anymore," Mrs. Calder said. "I need built-ins for my den. Call the shop." "I did. They haven't called back. Call again and ask for Celeste. I want you." "I don't build cabinets. You made sure they got built." Ruth felt Dee watching from the paint counter. "I don't do that now," she said. Mrs. Calder's disappointment was familiar and dangerous. Ruth had spent decades treating another person's disappointment as an assignment. She wrote Celeste's office number on the back of a bellwether receipt. "This is who you call," she said. "If you hire Danner, you hire the people who were there." Mrs. Calder accepted the number. Luke's truck came down Mays Lane after dark on Tuesday. Ruth saw the headlights pass the front windows. She moved the roof bucket away from the doorway before he entered, then disliked herself for doing it. He knocked this time. When she opened the door, Luke stood on the porch without a coat. He looked thinner. Sawdust dusted one shoulder of his black shirt. Under his arm was Ruth's old paper production calendar, the one that had been removed from the office wall on her final morning. New notes covered her pencil marks. Dates had been crossed out, rewritten, and connected by arrows until the pages resembled a losing battle. Ruth stepped aside. Luke entered and placed the calendar on May's table. For several seconds neither spoke. Then he said, "Tell me what I'm missing." Ruth looked at the calendar, then at her son. "Are you hiring me?" His face hardened, exactly as she knew it would. "I'm asking my mother for help." Ruth did not sit. Luke pulled out one of May's chairs and dropped into it. The production calendar spread before him. "You know what I mean?" he said. "I know exactly what you mean." "Then look at this." She remained across the table. The calendar was worse up close. Luke had written installation dates in black marker. Celeste had corrected them in blue. 3 jobs had been moved so often that the paper had worn thin beneath the eraser. Ruth recognized every name. Some customers had been with Danner since Samuel's garage. Others knew Luke, not her. The shop was no longer one thing or one era, no matter how fiercely Luke tried to hold it that way. "Who is coordinating with production?" she asked. "I am." "Who is confirming materials?" "Celeste." "Who is assigning installers?" "I am." "Who is talking to customers when a job moves?" "Celeste." "And who decides it moved?" Luke tapped the calendar. "That's what I'm trying to fix." "No. You're trying to do 3 jobs that require 3 different kinds of attention. Dad did it. Your father designed cabinets. I handled customers and materials. Eddie handled installers. Eddie worked for Dad. Everybody worked for your father, in your memory." Luke pushed back from the table. "Can you help or not? I can consult. $35 an hour, 4-hour minimum, written list of what you want reviewed. I will not take calls after the agreed time, and I will not supervise Celeste." His eyes narrowed. "You rehearsed that. I've had a month. You expect me to hire my own mother for 4 hours at a time? You hired someone to replace her. That again. It remains true even when you're tired of hearing it." Luke stood and walked to the stove. He held his hands toward the heat without asking. The sawdust on his shirt caught the light. "We lost Bramwell, I heard. The Price Kitchen canceled. Mrs. Calder says she'll sign only if you're involved. I told her to hire the people who were there. She says you sent her to Celeste." "I did. That doesn't help me. It might help Celeste." Luke turned. "This is what I'm talking about. You'd rather prove a point than help the family. Celeste is family." "You know what I mean?" Ruth was growing tired of being told that. "You had a business problem before you removed me," she said. "Too much knowledge lived inside individuals. You were right about that. But instead of learning what I knew, documenting it, and planning a transition, you threw out the person and expected the knowledge to stay. Because every time I tried to change something, you acted like I was insulting Dad. Sometimes you were. This was never my shop while you were there. The words came out raw. Ruth studied him. There it was beneath the ruined schedules and lost jobs. Not greed, not cruelty alone. A man who had inherited the thing he wanted and discovered his dead father still occupied every room, while his mother knew where all the tools were. "Did you think firing me would make it yours?" she asked. "I didn't fire you." She waited. Luke looked away first. "I needed room," he said. "You needed authority. Is that a crime?" "No. It's a responsibility." He gripped the back of May's chair. "I am responsible. 13 people depend on that shop. Their bills, their mortgages, everything. You're willing to let it go under because your feelings were hurt. The shop is not going under. You don't know that. Neither do you. Dad would be ashamed." The sentence was quiet. It did not need volume. Luke knew exactly where to place it. Ruth felt the old reflex inside her. Defend Samuel, protect the shop, correct the schedule, save Luke from the consequence of sounding like his father at his worst. Instead, she took the calendar and folded it closed. "Come with me." Luke frowned. "Where?" 10 feet away. "You'll survive." She led him into the front room. The honey-colored floor was scratched but clean. Curtains made from old linen hung at the windows. The sofa remained lumpy. Samuel's photograph stood on the mantel beside May's pencil note, which Ruth had framed in a cheap wooden frame. She pointed to the repaired bedroom window. "Celeste helped glaze that. She's good at it because somebody taught her." Luke's face tightened at his wife's name. Ruth showed him the new outlets, Howard's wiring, the insulation she and Jenna had installed, Eddie's oak porch rail waiting to be fitted, and the roof ledger with its careful columns. "I spent $900 because that was what I had," she said. "It bought enough material to keep one room dry and one room warm. Dee helped patch the roof. I work at her store. Howard traded electrical work for bookkeeping. Eddie brought scrap, and Jenna scraped wallpaper. You've made your point. Everybody helps except me. You came here to ask for help. I came because I need you." "No, Luke. You need the work I do. You still haven't asked whether I'm all right." He stared at her. The cottage made its ordinary sounds around them. Fire shifted in the stove. Wind pressed against the patched roof. Water tapped once into the bedroom bowl. Luke's gaze followed the sound. "This place is still leaking." "Yes. You're showing me all this like you won. I'm showing you what help looks like when the person receiving it is allowed to remain a person. I'm your son, and I'm your mother. Neither fact is an employment contract." His hand closed around the calendar. Ruth's voice softened despite herself. "I loved your father. I loved building that shop. But Samuel's talent filled every room, and I got very good at disappearing into the spaces around it. I solved what he forgot. I softened what he said. I made sure nobody saw how much it cost me, because I thought that was partnership. Dad loved you. I know. Then why are you talking about him like he used you? Because love and use can live in the same house." Luke's face changed. For a moment he looked frightened, as if she had loosened something structural. Then anger returned to brace it. "You think you were the only one living in his shadow?" "No. You think I wanted him dying and telling me the shop was mine one day and asking whether you'd check my numbers the next?" "No. He never trusted me." Ruth moved closer. "Then why are you still asking him what to do?" "I'm not. You brought him into this room. You did first." They stood facing each other, both breathing too fast. Ruth wanted to reach for him. She wanted to touch the side of his face and tell him Samuel had been proud. Samuel had been proud, though he rationed the words as if praise spoiled men. But that comfort had always come with a repair attached. Ruth would reassure Luke, Luke would accept no responsibility, and the shop would open Monday with the same wound beneath a new bandage. "I will consult on written terms," she said. "Or you can hire an experienced production manager and build a system that doesn't depend on one person saving everybody. Those are the kinds of help I can offer. I don't need a manager, then carry it yourself. You'd really let Dad's business fail. It is your business. Answer me." Ruth held his gaze. "I am willing to let you experience the full weight of owning it." Luke snatched up the calendar. "I hope this place was worth it," he said. Ruth opened the door. "So do I." He left without slamming it. That restraint hurt more. His truck lights moved through the trees and vanished. Ruth closed the door, set the latch, and returned to the kitchen. The 2 bowls from her supper stood in the sink. She washed them. She wiped the table. She straightened the chair Luke had moved. Only then did she sit on the floor beside the stove and cry. She cried for Samuel, for Luke, for the shop, and for the years in which her competence had made every unfair arrangement look functional. She cried because the right boundary had not felt brave. It had felt like refusing a drowning man the arm he intended to drag beneath him. When the fire burned low, Ruth added wood. The roof dripped twice in the bedroom and stopped. Celeste came to Bellwether Hardware the next afternoon. She waited until Dee went to the loading area before approaching the register. Luke told me what happened. Ruth rang up a box of screws for another customer. Did he? He said you chose the cottage over the shop. That's shorter than what happened. He also said you told him to hire a production manager. I did. Celeste placed both hands on the counter. I told him the same thing this morning. Ruth looked at her. I'm done coordinating production, Celeste said. I'll handle the office, accounting, and systems transition. If he wants me to stay, he hires someone who knows installations. What did he say? Nothing for 6 full minutes. That may be a record. I gave him until Friday. Ruth lowered her voice. Are you leaving him? The shop. I'm talking about the shop. All right, I don't know about the rest. Ruth resisted the urge to advise. All right, Celeste nodded, grateful or disappointed. Perhaps both. Friday came with wet snow that melted as it touched the road. Ruth watched it from the hardware store window, while Dee argued with a supplier over ice melt. At 11, Celeste sent one line. He posted the position. Ruth set down her phone. Relief arrived first. Grief followed. Luke had chosen to solve the problem without her. It was what she wanted, and it felt painfully similar to being replaced again. Dee came behind the counter. Good news? Responsible news. Worst kind. The shop eventually hired a production manager named Marcus Bell, a 54-year-old former mill supervisor who had no history with Samuel and no patience for inherited arguments. Ruth knew only what Celeste volunteered. Marcus shortened the installation board, reduced Luke's promised dates, and made every change require a written customer call. Luke never contacted Ruth. Cold settled over Bellwether. The roof patch held through 2 snows and failed during a warm January rain. Ruth and Dee reinforced it again. Howard's hands worsened, so he gave directions from the ground while Jenna climbed. Nobody pretended the arrangement was permanent. Ruth worked every available Saturday. The peppermint tin grew heavier. When spring mud softened Maze Lane, she called Ben Alvarez back. I have half, she told him. I can pay the rest monthly if you can wait until I have it. Ben considered the numbers, then offered a date late enough to give her time and early enough to beat summer storms. No discount, no miracle. A deposit, a schedule, and months of wages already earned. Ruth signed. The morning Ben's crew arrived, she stood in the yard as they lifted the first old shingles from the kitchen roof. Beneath them was not treasure. There was rot, exactly where Ben had predicted, and more work than Ruth wanted. She opened her ledger and made room for the cost. Ben found rot across 6 feet of roof decking and 1 rafter softened near the chimney. He showed Ruth each problem instead of announcing a larger number from the ground. She climbed only high enough to see safely, one hand on the ladder, while he pointed with a pencil. If we close over that, he said, you'll pay to open it again. How much? He told her. Ruth climbed down and opened the ledger on May's table. The extra work consumed most of what remained in the peppermint tin and added 4 payments to the arrangement she had made with Ben. Do it, she said. For 9 days, the cottage belonged to Noise. Hammers began at 7:30. Boots crossed overhead. Old shingles fell past the windows. Ruth made coffee for the crew, but did not provide lunch, wash clothes, or adopt anyone. On the 5th day, Ben handed her a change order and waited while she read every line. You can trust me, he said. I do. You're still checking? That's why I can trust you. He accepted that. The finished roof was dark gray, plain, and properly square where the cottage was not. Ruth stood in the yard during the first hard rain and watched water run into the gutters instead of her bedroom. She kept the saucepan beneath the old leak all night. In the morning, it was empty. Ruth carried it to the kitchen, washed it, and returned it to the cabinet. The act felt too small for celebration, so she celebrated by going to work. Dee had placed a store key beside the register. What's this? Ruth asked. An object commonly used with locks. I know what a key is. Then we're making progress. You said after 30 days. It's been 6 months. Ruth picked it up. The key hung from a yellow plastic tag marked Ruth in Dee's uneven handwriting. Does this mean more hours? It means if I'm late, customers stop staring through the window like abandoned livestock. I'm not opening without being paid. I would be offended if you did. Ruth added the key to the ring with May's brass one. She paid Ben every month. She worked Saturdays when Dee needed her and refused them when her knees or patients objected. Howard's business records eventually occupied 4 tidy archive boxes. He closed the repair company without an accountant invoking God and kept doing small jobs only when he wanted them. The final 2 hours he owed Ruth went unresolved because they disagreed over whether replacing the cottage's porch light had been part of the electrical trade. It took 20 minutes, Howard said. You spent 40 complaining about the fixture. That was design consultation. Ruth wrote balance disputed in the ledger. Howard began leaving his coffee cup in May's dish rack. Ruth noticed and said nothing. He brought a second chair onto the porch. She complained that it did not match the first, then painted both the same blue. Jenna visited without bringing projects for Ruth. Sometimes they worked. Sometimes they sat on the porch and spoke about nothing urgent. On one visit, Jenna admitted she had expected every conversation after the retirement lunch to become punishment. So did I, Ruth said. Why didn't it? Too much else needed doing. That sounds like you. It does. They were learning to notice when work became a hiding place. Neither was especially graceful about it. Celeste remained at Danner Woodworks. Marcus Bell took over production and installation scheduling, moved Luke out of the center of every decision, and developed the irritating habit of leaving at 5:30. The shop became smaller before it became steadier. Bramwell did not return. The Price kitchen went to another cabinet maker. Luke had to decline 2 jobs because Marcus refused to promise dates the crews could not meet. Nothing collapsed. Nothing returned to what it had been. Celeste came to the cottage one evening, carrying the office transition binder. Ruth looked at it and said, "If you burn that in my stove, the plastic tabs will smell." "I'm not burning it." Celeste opened to Ruth's responsibilities. The 11 bullet points had been crossed out. Behind them were 23 pages documenting vendors, customer communication, production revisions, and installation procedures. Each task had a name beside it. None said general office assistants. "I thought you should see it," Celeste said. Ruth turned the pages slowly. "You did this?" Marcus helped. Tasha corrected most of it. Raymond added a section called Things People Pretend Don't Happen. That should be the longest one. It is. On the final page, Celeste had written transition history. The first sentence read, "Previous office operations managed by Ruth Danner for 32 years. Ruth closed the binder. "Keep this at the shop," she said. "I thought you might want a copy." "No." Celeste looked disappointed. "I wanted it to be true there," Ruth said. "Now it is." Celeste carried the binder back to the truck. Before leaving, she said that she and Luke were trying to speak without using Samuel, the shop, or Ruth as a third person in the marriage. "How's that going?" Ruth asked. "We've discovered we don't agree much. That sounds promising." Celeste laughed. "I think so too." Luke remained absent through spring and most of summer. He sent Ruth a short message on her birthday. "Hope you had a good day." She answered, "I did, thank you." Neither added anything. His silence hurt differently as the months passed. It no longer felt like a weapon. It felt like a room neither of them knew how to enter. Ruth did not ask Jenna for reports, though Jenna sometimes offered them. Luke worked with Marcus. Luke and Celeste had taken a weekend away. Luke still drove Samuel's truck. Luke asked once whether Ruth's roof was finished but did not call her. In August, Ruth returned from Bellwether Hardware to find him standing beside the cottage lane. A wooden mailbox rested in the bed of Samuel's truck. Ruth recognized it beneath the fresh finish. Samuel had built it for May after her old metal box lost its door. May complained that the wooden one was too pretty for bills and used it until the post cracked. Luke had taken it to the shop years ago, promising to repair it. The new post was oak. The box had been sanded, sealed, and fitted with a brass flag. Luke placed one hand on it. "I found it behind the lumber rack. It was there a long time. I know." He looked healthier than he had the night he brought the ruined calendar, though older around the mouth. He wore work clothes, not the black shirt he used when he wanted authority. "Does the mail carrier come down here?" he asked. "To the end of the lane? I can install it there." "You can." Neither moved. Luke looked toward the cottage. The new roof showed above the trees. Eddie's oak rail was fitted to the porch, but not yet painted. Celeste says you're almost done paying Alvarez. 3 more months. That's good. It will be. He rubbed one thumb across the mailbox flag. I didn't come because I need something. Ruth waited. Marcus is working out, he said. That sounds like something. I mean, I'm not here about the shop. All right. Luke took a breath. I knew you didn't want to retire. The honesty was so direct that Ruth felt it in her chest. I told Celeste you did because I wanted her to take the job. I told Jenna you were exhausted because I knew she'd help convince you. I kept saying it wasn't firing because if it was retirement, then I wasn't the kind of man who fired his mother. Ruth set her hardware store bag on the porch. The apartment was worse, he continued. I knew you didn't have anywhere ready. I thought if we found somewhere nice, it would make the rest acceptable. It didn't. I know, do you? Yes. He did not defend himself. He did not mention pressure, Samuel, employees, or how much work he had carried. Ruth let the silence remain difficult. Luke looked at the porch rail. When I said Dad would be ashamed, I said it because I knew it would hurt you. Yes. I'm sorry. The apology did not restore the office, return her salary, or remove the sound of applause from the retirement lunch. It did not need to do impossible work to be real. Thank you for saying it plainly, Ruth said. Luke nodded. His eyes shone, but he blinked until they did not. Do you forgive me? Not all at once. A weak laugh escaped him. Fair. Ruth picked up the paint scraper from the porch floor and held it out. What's this? He asked. The rail needs another pass before paint. I brought a mailbox, and now you're scraping a rail. Luke took the tool. They worked until evening. He did not explain how to hold the scraper. Ruth did not correct him when he began at the wrong end. After an hour, she made sandwiches. The mailbox went up the next week. Luke returned the week after that with blue paint that was one shade darker than Ruth had chosen. She made him exchange it. Reconciliation proceeded through ordinary inconvenience. By autumn, the cottage still had crooked floors and one cabinet door that refused to close in humid weather. The kitchen walls were painted warm cream, except where Ruth had preserved May's pencil note. The roof was sound. The porch chairs matched. Samuel's boots remained beneath the hooks, beside Howard's muddy shoes and Luke's cleaner ones when both men happened to visit. Ruth invited everyone to supper on the first cold Wednesday of October. Dee brought stew large enough to feed a highway crew. Howard brought bread. Eddie brought nothing and defended the choice as consistency. Jenna brought an apple pie she had made herself. Celeste brought rolls. Luke arrived last, carrying firewood rather than an excuse. They crowded around May's long table. No one asked Ruth to serve every plate. No one expected her to remember what they had forgotten. Dee ladled stew. Luke cut bread. Celeste found bowls. Howard opened wine and denied bringing it despite holding the corkscrew. After supper, Jenna stood at the front window. Light from the kitchen reflected over the dark glass. We were wrong about this place, she said quietly. Ruth looked around the table. The repaired window held the cold outside. Scratches remained visible in the floor. The people gathered there had each changed some part of the cottage, though none had been permitted to own it. They were never laughing at the cottage, Ruth said. They were laughing at the idea that I could choose something they hadn't chosen for me. Luke lowered his eyes, then he raised his glass. To May's tax bill with raccoons. Ruth touched her glass to his. Outside, Samuel's restored mailbox stood at the end of the lane. Inside, the cottage windows glowed against the woods, and everyone who entered had knocked first.